I used to think Christmas was my favorite time of year. Twinkling lights on rooftops, the gentle hush that settles over a town powdered in snow, the scent of cinnamon and oranges drifting through my grandmother's house. But this year, everything tasted like bitterness under my tongue. My name is Marin Whitlock, and this is the Christmas when my family finally showed me my place, and I showed them mine. It began with the snow. I remember standing on the cracked stone steps of my mother's porch, boots crunching in the fresh layer that fell that morning, my breath rising in sharp clouds. I'd spent the last of my savings on the bus ride back home, a journey I dreaded more than I cared to admit. As I stood there, clutching my battered suitcase in one hand and a pie I'd baked in the other, I wondered if this would be the year I'd feel like I belonged. Inside, the warmth hit me like a slap of nostalgia and fresh resentment all at once. My mother, Lorraine, hovered by the kitchen, barking orders at my younger sister Tessa, who fluttered around her like a nervous bird. My stepfather, Graham, lounged in his recliner in the living room, half watching the game on TV, half pretending to care who walked through the door. "Marin!" My mother's voice sliced through my thoughts. "Don't just stand there freezing your toes off. Close the door, you'll let all the heat out." I nudged the door shut with my boot, ignoring the icy drip down my collar. "Merry Christmas to you too, Mum," she sniffed. "Set your things down. We've got more important things to do than exchange pleasantries." I squeezed past the half-decorated tree, plastic ornaments from a discount store, tinsel drooping from years of reuse. I dropped my suitcase at the foot of the stairs, out of the way of the chaos. I didn't expect a warm welcome. God knows I'd never gotten one, but some small part of me still hoped for it. Even at 26, I craved it like a child craving candy they'd never tasted. In the kitchen, Tessa caught my eye and gave me a quick, apologetic smile. She had a new ring on her finger, another piece of news I hadn't been told in advance, probably engaged to that smug banker she'd been seeing. I wondered if they'd wait until after the holiday to tell me, or if it would be used as the grand dinner announcement, another reminder that she was the one who made Mum proud. I set my pie on the crowded counter. "Where should I put this?" Mum glanced at it, unimpressed. "We have more than enough desserts. Maybe you can take it back with you." I bit my tongue. "It's for everyone." She didn't reply. She barked another order at Tessa, and I just stood there, invisible, the way I'd always been. The only people who noticed me were my cousin's children, who tugged on my sleeves, sticky hands demanding sweets or attention. Through it all, Graham kept his eyes on the TV, only glancing my way when the commentator shouted over a touchdown. He used to be my hero years ago. Now he was just another man in a sagging chair who pretended I didn't exist. Dinner was late. Mum was always late, and she made sure everyone knew it wasn't her fault. The turkey was overdone, the potatoes were cold, but no one dared say a word. We crammed ourselves around the long dining table, Mum at the head, Graham at the other end, and the rest of us slotted in like mismatched puzzle pieces. I tried to find a seat. That's when it happened. I reached for the last open chair, and Mum's voice rose over the clatter of plates and cutlery. "No, Marin, that's for Liam. He's got a bad knee, you know that." The silence that wrapped itself around the living room after my mother's words felt thick enough to chew through. I swear the crackling of the fire in the hearth sounded like gunfire in that moment. All those eyes, blood relatives, in-laws, children who didn't yet understand the sharp edges hidden behind polite family smiles. They were all on me now. "Merry Christmas, Mum. The house is mine now." I didn't flinch. Not when Graham's mouth hung open like a fool who'd lost his place at the poker table. Not when Tessa's eyes darted from me to Mum, trying to guess which side of this rift she should stand on. I'd spent years perfecting the art of shrinking into corners, of biting back every word I ever wanted to say. But that part of me had died the second they decided I was worth less than a broken dining chair. My mother's fingers twitched against the envelope. She held it like it might burn through her palm at any second. "You're lying," she said, her voice so calm it could have been a whisper at my bedside when I was 5 and scared of monsters under my bed. The monsters were real. They just lived in the living room instead. "No, Lorraine," I said. purposefully using her first name like a slap across her carefully powdered cheek. "I'm not." Graham made a sound, some half-strangled attempt at a scoff, but the man had no real backbone left in him. "Marin, you don't have that kind of money." "Oh?" I said, stepping forward, my boots creaking against the warped floorboards. "You think I've just been floating around for the last 5 years, huh? I work. I save. I make things happen while you sit in your recliner bitching about bad knees that never seem to stop you from walking to the pub." He had the audacity to bristle at that, one hand curling around the armrest like he might push himself up and show me who was in charge. But he didn't stand. He never did. Tessa finally found her voice. She stepped between Mum and me like she'd done when we were kids, and Mum's words were sharper than any slap. Her eyes were soft, watery. "Marin, please. This can't be true." "It is," I said, my voice steady. "You all love to talk about family like it's a shield, like it's something I'm supposed to be grateful for. But when I needed help, you told me to sort myself out. When I was sick, you told me to get over it. When I sat in the kitchen eating alone, I laughed, a sound that felt like glass breaking in my throat. You told me that was all I deserved." Mum tried to speak, but the words caught behind her teeth like splinters. She shoved the envelope at Graham. He took it, flipping through the papers with eyes that couldn't keep up with the reality staring him down. "Where did you get this?" Mum demanded. Her voice was brittle now. "Who did you bribe? Whose money did you take?" I almost felt sorry for this cold woman with her pinched lips and desperate need to keep her illusions intact. Almost. "It's my money, every penny. I've been working since I left. Double shifts, overtime, freelance jobs you'd turn your nose up at. I've been paying the mortgage behind your back for 6 months. Dad left just enough of this place in trust to make that possible, remember?" I watched the understanding crawl across her face like oil across water. Her mouth opened and closed, but no apology came. No shock that maybe her daughter had done the impossible, only the horror that her tight-fisted grip on this rotting house was slipping away. Ellie, my cousin, cleared her throat from the sofa. "So, what does this mean?" "It means," I said, letting the words hang heavy in the air, "that this house is mine now. I own it. And if you want to keep living here, you'll have to follow my rules." Graham barked a bitter laugh. "You think you can just, toss us out? We raised you." I met his eyes dead on. "You raised me to know exactly what people are worth when they show you who they really are." Mum's eyes flashed then. The woman who had once told me my hair was too wild, my clothes too cheap, my dreams too big, she found her fire. "You selfish, ungrateful little girl. You think a few signed papers make you better than your own family? We've held this house together for 30 years. You held it together while you let it rot," I said, gesturing around at the peeling wallpaper, the water stains on the ceiling, the warped floorboards that creaked like old bones. "And you'd have lost it by spring when the bank came for what you owe. I bought it to save my name, my father's name. You think you're angry? Good. I'm not here to make you feel comfortable anymore." Tessa stepped forward, tears brimming. "Marin, please, let's talk about this. Don't do this at Christmas." "Christmas?" I said. "You made me eat in the kitchen like a dog. This is exactly the right time." I pushed past them, my pulse racing like a runaway train in my veins. I could feel every heart in the room hammering just like mine, but none of them would admit it. They would cling to the polite fiction that we were family, even as they looked at me like a traitor. I walked down the narrow hallway to the den, Dad's old study, left mostly untouched since he died. It smelled like stale books and pipe tobacco and memories that used to make me feel safe before Mum turned them into ghosts. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting the tremor run through my legs now that they couldn't see me falter. I sank into Dad's old leather chair. The weight of what I'd done settled on my shoulders like a snowstorm. I was alone. More alone than ever, maybe. But I was free. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked, but the message from my solicitor was still there. Asterisk. The deed is finalized. Transfer complete. Congratulations, Miss Whitlock. Asterisk. Congratulations. What a word for a family torn apart. A knock rattled the door. I didn't answer. It opened anyway. Of course it did. Tessa slipped in, closing it behind her. Her face blotchy from crying. She didn't speak for a long time. Just perched on the edge of the desk, twisting her engagement ring around her finger. "Marin," she whispered, "you could have told me." "I tried," I said. "You didn't pick up." She flinched at that. "I was busy." "We're all busy, Tess." She looked around the room like she was searching for Dad's ghost to save her from the mess. "What happens now?" I sighed. "You can stay here if you want, but Mom and Graham, they're going to have to figure out how to pay rent. I'm not going to let them keep pretending I'm just a mistake they have to hide away." Tessa's eyes filled again. "You know Mom will never forgive you." "Do you think I care anymore?" We sat there in the thick, sour quiet of unspoken things. A sister who chose silence over loyalty. A daughter who'd given up waiting for her mother's love. A woman who finally had the keys to her own freedom. But at what cost? Outside the window, snow had started falling again, soft and relentless. I remembered how, when we were girls, Tessa and I used to build snow forts in the back garden. We'd make up stories about running away to live in our ice castle, where Mom couldn't yell at us for laughing too loud. I guess in the end, I'd built my own fort after all, one made of legal papers and signatures instead of snow. Tessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at me, her face pale. "They're all talking about you out there. Mom's saying you forged it, that you're lying." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Of course she is." "What are you going to do?" Tessa asked. I stood, the old leather chair creaking under me. "I'm going to show them just how real this is." I opened the door and walked back into the hallway. The lights felt too bright, the laughter from the living room forced and tinny like an off-key carol. I could hear Graham muttering, Ellie whispering to her husband. The kids were playing on the rug, oblivious. Mom was pacing near the fireplace, the envelope now torn and crumpled in her hand. She turned when she heard me, her face a mask of polite venom. "So what's next, Miss Big Shot? You gonna kick us out in the snow?" I let the words come slow, deliberate. "I'm not cruel. I'm not you." Her face went pale at that. A bullseye. I crossed the room to the tree, where they'd stacked the gifts, all shiny paper and cheap ribbons. I grabbed the one with my name on it, badly wrapped by Tessa, probably, and ripped it open. It was a scarf. Scratchy, bargain bin wool, beige, and lifeless. I held it up like a flag. "This," I said, voice calm, "is what you think I'm worth." An afterthought. A pity present for the girl in the kitchen. "Well, here's my gift to you. New rules. Starting tonight, this house is mine. If you want to stay, you'll pay rent. If you want to eat, you'll treat me like I exist. And if you don't like it," I shrugged, dropping the scarf onto the floor, "there's the door." A hush fell over the room so complete, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in a blizzard. Mom's eyes narrowed to slits. "You think you're so much better than us?" I met her glare, my pulse a steady drumbeat in my throat. "No, I just know what I'm worth now." She stepped forward, her voice dropping to a hiss only I could hear. "You'll regret this, Marin. Family always comes first, blood always wins." I leaned in, close enough to smell the cheap red wine on her breath. "That's the thing about blood, Lorraine. It dries up when you drain it for years." The clock on the mantel chimed midnight. Christmas was over, and so was I. Over being small, over being quiet, over letting other people decide my worth. I turned my back on her and walked to the stairs. Each step felt like a door slamming shut behind me. Upstairs, the landing creaked under my boots. I pushed open my old bedroom door, a shrine of a girl who no longer existed. Posters curling off the walls. A single, sad twin bed with the quilt my grandmother made before she died. I sank onto it, my suitcase still there where I'd dropped it hours ago. I didn't unpack. I just sat there, my hands trembling now that no one could see. In the distance, I heard Mum's voice rising, Graham's low mutter, Tessa trying to calm them all down. The house rattled with the weight of it all, secrets cracking open like fault lines under my feet. I lay back on the quilt, staring at the hairline crack in the ceiling. I imagined it widening, the roof peeling away like paper, until the stars poured in to remind me that there was a world beyond this house. A world I could make mine. Somewhere, deep in my chest, a tiny seed of fear tried to sprout. What if I'd gone too far? What if this house turned into a prison of my own making? But I crushed that thought before it could bloom. I'd lived in their prison long enough. A soft knock came at my door. Not Tessa this time. It was little Annie, Ellie's girl, her curls still tangled from sleep. She padded in, dragging her teddy bear by one limp arm. "Auntie Marin?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart?" She crawled onto the bed beside me, tucking herself under my arm like she'd done when she was smaller. "Are you mad at Nana?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, baby, I'm not mad. I'm just making things better." She nodded like she understood. "Maybe kids always do." She pressed her bear into my side like a peace offering. "If Nana makes you sad, you can come stay at my house." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of kid shampoo and innocence I'd never get back. "Thank you, Annie. I just might." She fell asleep before I did, her little breath soft against my ribs. I lay there in the dark, listening to the storm of my family raging below. I knew this was just the beginning. The papers were signed, the house was mine. But ownership is just ink. Power is something you have to defend, over and over, until people believe it's real. I closed my eyes, clutching Annie's bear to my chest like a shield. The war had begun, and I wasn't leaving this house until I'd won. ... I don't remember drifting off. I only remember the way the cold bled through the old walls, the hiss of the wind pressing against the window panes like a restless spirit trying to get in. When I woke, the first thing I felt was the weight of Annie's tiny arm flung over my chest, her soft breaths tickling my collarbone. For one fleeting moment, I pretended I was still that girl who believed Christmas was warmth, family, belonging. But then I heard the hush of voices downstairs, that brittle edge of anger wrapped in forced civility, and the memory of what I'd done the night before snapped back into my veins. I slipped from under Annie's arm, tucking her bear back into the crook of her elbow so she wouldn't wake. Her hair fanned across my pillow, a gold halo in the dawn light. I pressed my lips to her forehead, a silent promise. "You'll never sit alone in the kitchen, baby girl. Not if I had any say in it." Downstairs, the air was sharp with the smell of leftover turkey and stale wine. The aftermath of family war felt like stepping into a battlefield the morning after the cannons stopped. Broken ornaments littered the floor by the tree. Someone must have knocked it in the shouting. A wine glass lay in a glittering grave of shards near the fireplace. And there, at the kitchen table, sat Lorraine, my mother, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug that still said "World's Best Mom" in faded letters. The irony would have been funny if my stomach didn't twist every time I looked at her. She didn't turn when I stepped in. Her hair was pinned back too tight, like she thought keeping it neat could hold her world together. Graham wasn't there. Neither was Tessa. Just the two of us, suspended in this moment that felt like the world holding its breath. "You sleep well?" she asked, her tone so pleasant I almost laughed. The kind of sweetness that sticks to your teeth and makes you wonder what poison hides underneath. "Well enough," I said, pulling out the chair opposite her. The wood creaked under me, a sound that felt too loud in the heavy quiet. "Where is everyone?" She stirred her tea with a spoon that clinked against the porcelain, a tiny metronome marking time I refused to give back. Graham went out, said he needed air. Tessa's upstairs, packing. Packing? My chest tightened around the word. Why? She finally met my eyes. Hers were bloodshot from crying, or maybe just from having to live in a reality where her punching bag had learned how to punch back. "She doesn't want to stay here now. Says it feels hostile." I snorted. "It's not a hotel, Lorraine. It's my house. If she wants to leave, that's her choice." Mum's mouth twitched. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "I didn't win anything," I said, leaning forward, my elbows on the table like a dare. I earned it. You all made sure it was never going to be given to me. She set the spoon down with a click so sharp it made me flinch, though I masked it quick. You're so much like your father, always thinking you're better than this place. Than me. I felt my jaw tighten. Dad wanted better. He wanted us safe. He wanted me safe. Her laugh was small and mean, like nails tapping on a coffin lid. He wanted you to be a good girl, to take care of your family. You mean to take care of you, I shot back. Is that what you think this was? A retirement plan you could drain dry? Her eyes narrowed, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not after all the words I'd swallowed for so long they tasted like rust in my mouth. You let this house fall apart because you thought someone else would fix it. You let me fall apart too. But here's the thing, Lorraine. You don't get to keep the house and the power. You can pick one, and guess what? The house is mine now. She pushed back from the table so suddenly the mug sloshed tea onto her wrist. She didn't flinch. You think you can handle it? All the bills? The repairs? This place is a leech, Marin. It'll bleed you dry, just like it did me. I stood. I wouldn't sit below her anymore. Maybe it will, but at least it's my blood this time. I turned before she could spit her poison again. The back door banged behind me as I stepped out into the yard. The cold slapped my face awake, the snow crisp under my boots. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the wind tear through my hair. The back garden looked smaller than I remembered. Patches of grass buried under the snow, the old swing set rusting near the fence. Dad built that swing with his own hands. I could almost hear him laughing, pushing me higher and higher, telling me not to be afraid of the fall. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the only number I trusted anymore. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Rough, sleep-heavy, but warm. Jason. My oldest friend. The one person who never asked me to shrink to make him feel big. Marin? You okay? Yeah, I lied. My breath clouded around me like secrets I'd never say. I did it. You did what? He asked, but I knew he already knew. The house. It's mine. A low whistle. You really did it, huh? You standing there like some badass queen on your frozen lawn? I laughed, and it cracked the ice that had formed in my chest overnight. Pretty much. I'm proud of you, Red. Don't call me that. Can't help it. You're still Red to me. His voice turned softer. You need me to come by? Help with the fallout? I looked at the kitchen window, where I could see Lorraine's silhouette, watching me like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. Yeah, maybe I do. On my way. Give me an hour. I hung up and slipped my phone back in my pocket, my fingers stiff with the cold. I walked around to the front of the house, tracing my steps like I was seeing it for the first time. The porch needed new boards. The gutter sagged. One shutter hung at an awkward angle. Every flaw felt like a dare. Fix me, the house whispered. Prove you can. Inside, I heard the muffled thud of footsteps on the stairs. Tessa appeared at the front door, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were red, but her chin lifted when she saw me. You're really going to make Mum pay rent? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm going to make her see me, I said. For once. Tessa chewed her lip. You're not like her, Marin, I shrugged. Aren't I? She made me. Tessa stepped down, her boots crunching in the snow beside mine. She reached out, brushing a stray hair from my cheek like she used to when we were kids, hiding under our blankets from the thunder. I'll come back, when it's calmer. You do what you need to do, Tess. She leaned in, pressed her forehead to mine for half a heartbeat, then turned and walked down the drive to her car. The engine coughed to life, tires crunching down the street that would always feel too small for my dreams. I didn't watch her go. I just stood there until the wind bit my skin numb and the door behind me creaked open. Brave face, huh? Jason's voice cut through the cold like sunlight. He looked older, hair flecked with gray at the temples, his old work coat dusted with snow. He crossed the yard in 3 strides and pulled me into a hug that smelled like motor oil and fresh air. I didn't realize how much I was shaking until his hands steadied me. "You really did it," he said into my hair. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. I'm just proud of you." I pulled back, brushing tears from my lashes with the heel of my hand. "I don't want your pity." "Not pity, Red. Never that." I sniffed, laughing at the sound of it. "You want to see the wreck you helped me buy?" He grinned, that old crooked smile that had gotten us both into so much trouble when we were teenagers. "Lead the way, boss lady." We walked through the front door together and it felt different, like it was really mine now that someone was there to witness it. Lorraine had vanished, but I could feel her fury soaked into the wallpaper, her disbelief dripping from the cracks in the ceiling. Jason whistled low as he took in the living room. "Place needs work." "You think I don't know that?" He nudged me with his elbow. "Good thing I know a guy." "Yeah? Who's that?" He winked. "You're looking at him." He spent the next hour helping me pull up old carpet that smelled like damp secrets, scraping at the corners of decades-old grime. He didn't ask me for explanations. He didn't need to. That was the thing about Jason. He understood the parts of me that never made sense to anyone else. We found old photos wedged behind the sideboard, me and Tessa in matching dresses, Mum smiling with her lipstick too red and her eyes too cold. I stacked them in a box. Maybe I'd keep them, maybe I'd burn them. I hadn't decided yet. By midday, Graham came home, snow clinging to his boots like excuses. He stood in the doorway, watching Jason and me work like he'd stumbled into someone else's life. "You gonna pitch in or just stand there?" Jason asked, not looking up from the carpet he was ripping up. Graham's mouth opened, then shut. He shuffled past us like a ghost, disappearing into the den. I didn't follow him. He wasn't my problem anymore. When the sun started to slip behind the bare trees, Jason straightened, wiping dust from his hands. "I should go. Got a shift tonight." "Thanks for coming." He hooked his thumb under my chin, tipping my face up to his. "You're gonna be okay." "I know. You're gonna be more than okay." I swallowed, my throat tight. "Go before you make me cry again." He chuckled, brushing his lips across my forehead before stepping into the dusk. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was alone again, but not the same kind of alone as before. This was the kind that felt like possibility instead of punishment. I locked the door. My door. Upstairs, I found Lorraine in her bedroom. My old bedroom now, technically, sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to me. She held one of Dad's old shirts in her lap, her fingers tracing the buttons like they might come undone and bring him back. She didn't look up when I spoke. "You can stay here, but you'll pay. And you'll respect me." Her shoulders rose and fell. "You think you're so righteous." "No," I said. "I just think I'm done." She turned then, her eyes rimmed red, her mouth trembling like she might spit venom or beg for mercy. I didn't care which. "You'll regret this, Marin. Mark my words." I smiled, and it felt like breaking free. "Maybe I will, but it'll be my regret, Lorraine. Mine alone." I closed the door on her stunned silence. Back in the hallway, I leaned against the wall, my heart hammering like it wanted to break through my ribs. I could still hear the storm of my family's whispers downstairs. Accusations, bitterness, fear. But above all, that noise was something I hadn't felt in years. My own voice. Clear, strong, unforgiving. I stepped into the spare room, my new office, maybe, and looked out at the snow falling soft as secrets. The cold seeped through the glass, but I didn't flinch. I stood there for a long time, imagining new paint on the walls, fresh floors, laughter that wasn't poisoned at the dinner table. A home. Not just a house. And as the night drew its cold curtain across the town, I knew this was only the beginning. Owning the house was just the first step. Keeping safe, would take more than signed papers. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Tessa's voice, low and urgent. Then a thud. something breaking. Lorraine's voice, sharp as a blade. I turned from the window, my pulse spiking. I'd won a battle, but the war had just come home to roost. Dash, dash, dash. The war had just come home to roost. I stood frozen by the window, snow drifting past the glass in lazy spirals, while the storm inside this house swelled louder than the one outside. I could hear Lorraine's voice, sharp and cold like the edge of an old knife. Tessa's muffled pleading. Graham's bark of something. Maybe a command, maybe a curse. My fingers curled into the windowsill until my knuckles ached. It would have been so easy to shut the door on them all, to barricade myself in this room that didn't even have furniture yet, and pretend the poison they poured wouldn't seep through the floorboards. But I knew better. You can't lock out rot once it's set into the bones of a place. I slipped out into the hallway, every step a dare. The air smelled of stale arguments, and the faint, sour hint of the whiskey Graham always kept hidden behind the old encyclopedias in the den. He thought no one knew, but I did. I'd known all the family secrets, the small ones that made you laugh with your best friend when you were 13, and the big ones that left you lying awake at night wondering why you kept pretending you were wanted. At the top of the stairs I paused. Tessa was halfway down the landing, blocking the path between Lorraine and Graham, who were facing off near the bottom step. Lorraine's hands were on her hips, her mouth twisted in that way that used to make me shrink back when I was a girl, afraid that the next word would be a dagger aimed for my soft spots. "Just saying we have to be practical, Graham," she snapped, her voice slicing through Tessa's shushing. "She thinks she owns this place, but we've lived here for 30 years. You think I'm going to let some slip of a girl tell me what to do in my own home? I own home." The irony of it stung, but I bit it down. I needed to hear them before I stepped in. Graham's face was red. Whether from the cold or the cheap whiskey, I couldn't tell. His hands were balled into fists that trembled slightly. "It isn't your home anymore, Lorraine. That's the problem. You didn't see this coming, you didn't pay a dime when you could have, and now look at you, yelling at everyone like that'll change the goddamn deed." Tessa's eyes darted to me at the top of the stairs. A tiny flicker of relief crossed her face. She'd always been the peacemaker, but you can't make peace when both sides want blood. "Stop it," she hissed at them, her voice too soft to make a dent. "Stop yelling. Annie's trying to sleep." I felt that old rage spark in my ribs. Always the children, always the next generation stuck hearing the worst of what family could be, soaking it up like dirty rain. I wouldn't let Annie grow up with these shadows hanging over her the way they'd hung over me. I took the steps slow, letting the wood creak under my boots so they couldn't pretend they didn't know I was there. Lorraine's head snapped up when she heard me, her eyes narrowing to thin slits that would have cut skin if they were knives. "Oh, look who's decided to join us," she sneered. "The big boss herself." I reached the bottom step, planting my boots on the warped floorboards that had been the stage for every argument I'd ever overheard in this house. "Don't start, Lorraine." She flinched at the name. She hated it when I didn't call her Mom. But Mom felt like a word that belonged to some other woman, some distant dream of softness that had died with my father. Graham stepped back, pressing his knuckles to his mouth like he was holding in something mean or useless. Same difference. Tessa's eyes were wide and wet, pleading with me to fix something I didn't break. "I'm not starting anything, Marin," Lorraine said, drawing my name out like it was dirt she had to spit from her mouth. "You're the one who's turned this house upside down. This was supposed to be our home. Your father would be spinning in his grave if he saw you trying to ruin Christmas like this." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Don't talk about Dad. You don't get to use him as your shield now. He's the reason I could do this in the first place." She stepped closer, her perfume sharp and cloying under my nose. That sickly floral she thought smelled expensive, but always reminded me of hospital waiting rooms. "You think you're so righteous. You think you're better than us because you scraped together enough pennies to buy back what should have stayed in this family." "It is staying in this family," I shot back. "You just don't get to keep pretending you're in charge." Tessa put her hand on my arm, her touch warm and trembling. "Please, Marin, we need to find a way to make this work." I turned to her, my jaw softening even as my heart hardened. "I gave you my terms, Tess. Lorraine pays rent. Gram pays rent. Or they find somewhere else to be. This is non-negotiable. Lorraine's laugh was dry as dead leaves. And where do you expect us to go? You think you can just toss your own mother into the street? I met her eyes dead on. I think I'm done being the only one who sacrifices everything to keep this family's mess from swallowing me whole. Gram barked out a sour laugh, pushing past Tessa so fast she stumbled back into the banister. You've always thought you were better than this place, girl. Just like your old man. Look where that got him. 6 feet under before 50, working himself to death trying to fix everything alone. My throat closed for a moment. Because that part was true, wasn't it? Dad had believed in this place. He'd believed in Narcissus Asterisk, in Lorraine. And in the end, the house ate him alive, piece by piece. The mortgage he'd taken out to fix the roof that never got done. The second job to cover Mom's spending, when she pretended there was enough. All the unpaid bills he'd hidden under the sink so we wouldn't know he was drowning until he was already gone. Don't you dare speak about him, I snapped, my voice cracking like ice. You drank away what little backbone you had left years ago, Gram. His face went purple, and for a second I thought he might lunge at me. But he didn't. He just shoved his hands deep into his pockets and turned his back, shoulders hunched like a beaten dog. I didn't pity him. I couldn't afford to. Lorraine stepped into the space between us, her voice softer now. That dangerous softness she used when she wanted something. Marin, be reasonable. We can work this out. Family doesn't do this to each other. I wanted to laugh, but all that came out was a sigh so heavy it felt like my lungs might collapse. Family doesn't make you eat alone in the kitchen at Christmas, Lorraine. She flinched at that. A tiny crack in her armor. Good. Let it hurt. Tessa looked at me like she might shatter if I didn't throw her a lifeline. What do you want, Mare? Just tell us, we'll do it. I felt the words line up behind my teeth. The rules I'd been stitching together all night. Every stitch a reminder that I was never going to shrink for them again. You'll pay your share, I said, my voice flat and cold. You'll help fix this place instead of letting it rot around you. You'll treat me like I exist, like I matter. And if you can't do that, you can pack up your bitterness and find somewhere else to ruin. Lorraine's mouth trembled. You're going to throw your own mother out. I'm giving you a choice, I said. Something you never gave me. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Gram snorted, pushing past me toward the den. This is bullshit, he muttered. You'll see. She thinks she's some big shot. You'll run back crying when this place breaks you. I didn't watch him go. I turned back to Lorraine and Tessa. Lorraine's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat to her thighs like she could pin her rage in place. You've got until the end of the month, I said, my voice a whisper that felt louder than a scream. Get your finances in order, or get out. Tessa opened her mouth, but Lorraine cut her off. You ungrateful child, she spat. You'll regret this. I shrugged. Maybe, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. I turned away from them, my legs trembling under me like the floor might swallow me whole if I didn't keep moving. Upstairs, Annie's soft snores drifted through the crack under the guest room door. I pressed my hand to it, grounding myself in the tiny pulse of innocence that still existed in this house. This is for her too, asterisk, I told myself. So she never has to sit alone in the kitchen. I slipped into my room, shutting the door behind me with a final click that felt like a seal, on a promise I couldn't break now if I wanted to. I dropped onto the bed, the old mattress groaning under my weight, and let the tears come, silent hot streaks down my cheeks. I didn't sob. I just let it burn through me until the worst of it was gone. Then I lay back, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the faint echo of Lorraine's anger reverberating through the pipes and floorboards. They thought I'd break. Maybe I would. But I'd rebuild myself better this time. Stronger, harder to knock down. They'd taught me how to survive the cold. They just never expected me to become it. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Jason had left a text. Need me to come back tonight? I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box for a long time before typing, "Not yet." But soon, the next few days passed like moving through syrup, thick and slow and clinging to my skin no matter how much I tried to scrub it off. Lorraine pretended she couldn't see me when we passed in the hallway, her eyes drifting just over my shoulder like I was a ghost haunting my own house. Graham sulked in the den, emerging only for food or to bark at Tessa when she asked him to help fix the loose gutter that threatened to crash down in the next storm. Tessa hovered, sometimes a sister, sometimes a stranger, always trying to make it all make sense in her head. She didn't understand yet that you can't put poison back in the bottle once it's spilled all over the floor. I spent my days ripping up carpet, scrubbing walls, making lists that grew longer every time I crossed off a line. Furnace repairs, roof patching, plumbing that clanked in the walls like it was mocking me. Every dollar I'd saved was already slipping through my fingers like grains of salt in a broken hourglass. And yet, with every blister on my palms, every sore muscle in my back, I felt more alive than I'd ever been under this roof. I'd given Lorraine until the end of the month, but she didn't seem to believe I meant it. She still barked at me about leaving dishes in the sink, about muddy boots in the hallway, about how my friends, meaning Jason, were always underfoot, tracking dirt and bad ideas through her house. Her house. The word clanged like a dull bell every time she said it. I started to keep a tally in my head. A petty habit that made me smile in the middle of the night, when the cold seeped through the old windows and the pipes groaned like ghosts. By the second week, I found an envelope tucked under my bedroom door. No note, just a single folded check made out to asterisk cash for a pitiful sum and Lorraine's sharp, looping signature in the corner. A token payment, like throwing pennies at a debt collector. I didn't cash it. I taped it to the fridge instead, a silent warning every time she came into the kitchen for her morning tea. Tessa begged me to give her time. "She's trying, Marin," she whispered one night as we sat on the back step, our breath fogging the night air. "No, Tess," I said, my voice steady. "She's pretending." "That's not the same thing." She wiped her eyes on her sleeve like she was still that girl sitting on my bed at 15, telling me she'd never let Mum hurt me again. But childhood promises are paper thin when the cold winds of family obligations start blowing. I didn't blame her. Not really. We all survived the way we could. Tessa survived by keeping the peace. I survived by learning when to swing back. The third week brought a storm. A real one. The kind that rattles old windows and claws at the roof until you hear the shingles weeping overhead. Graham's shouting downstairs was drowned out by the wind howling through the gaps in the door frames. I found Lorraine standing in the hallway near the coat rack, her suitcase open on the floor, clothes spilling out like guts. "You're really going to do this," she said when she saw me. Her voice was small, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Not soft, not kind, just small. "I told you," I said. "You chose." Her eyes darted toward the den, where Graham's voice was a slurred echo of resentment. "And him? He stays? He can make his own choices." She laughed, a hollow sound that reminded me of all the Christmases I'd spent wishing she'd love me the way she loved her image of herself. "You're just like your father." I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in weeks. "I know." She slammed her suitcase shut, clothes still half hanging out. "You'll regret this. One day, when this house has eaten you alive, you'll regret throwing us out." "Maybe?" I said, stepping aside to let her pass. "But at least I'll have something that's mine to regret." She pushed past me, the cold wind slamming into the hallway as she yanked the front door open. The storm swallowed her silhouette before I could even blink. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I turned back to the den, where Graham's voice had finally gone quiet. And that's when I heard it. A low, muffled crash, a sound that made the fine hairs on my neck stand on end. I stepped closer, my boots squeaking on the old floorboards. The door to the den was ajar, shadows spilling across the hall. I pushed it open with one finger, the hinges wailing like a warning. Graham stood in the middle of the room, his back to me. He was breathing hard, shoulders hunched, and at his feet, the safe. The old fireproof safe Dad had kept under the sideboard. The one I hadn't even gotten around to prying open yet. Its door swung open now, bent at the hinges like someone had kicked it until it cracked. Papers scattered across the rug. Old deeds, my birth certificate, scraps of Dad's insurance policy. Lorraine had always pretended didn't exist. And in Graham's shaking hands, the envelope. Not the mortgage papers I'd signed. This was something else. Something yellowed and thick and sealed with my father's handwriting across the flap. I felt my blood turn to ice. Graham, what are you doing? He didn't turn. He just let out a low, ragged laugh that stank of whiskey and secrets. You think you know everything, Marin? He rasped. You don't know shit. Asterisk. I took a step forward, the floorboard groaning under my heel. What is that? What's in the envelope? He turned, his eyes bloodshot and wet, a wild grin splitting his cracked lips. You think you're the queen of this place? You think your old man left you everything? He held up the envelope like a priest holding a sacrament. This changes everything, asterisk girl. My heart slammed so hard I thought my ribs would shatter. Open it, I whispered. Right now! He laughed again, a cruel, hollow sound that rattled through the den like a ghost. He lifted the envelope to his lips, pressed a kiss to my father's scrawled signature. Then he ripped it open. Dash, dash, dash! Then he ripped it open. I swear I heard the paper tear all the way down to my bones, like it was my father's voice splitting at the seams. Graham's breath came ragged, that sour smell of stale whiskey and self-loathing rolling across the den like a fog. For a second he just stood there with his thick fingers clumsy on the brittle edges of the envelope, staring at the yellowed letter folded inside. The safe lay open behind him, its metal face warped and dented where he'd kicked it until the lock surrendered. Years of secrets spilled across the old rug. Birth certificates, insurance forms, the tiny velvet box that used to hold my mother's wedding band before she pawned the real one and replaced it with a fake she thought no one would notice. It felt like I was staring at the wreckage of an old ship dredged up from the bottom of some poisoned sea. Graham looked at me then, his eyes bloodshot, his lips curling in a sneer that didn't hide the tremble in his hands. He held up the letter like he'd just unearthed the last grenade in a buried minefield. Your old man didn't trust you as much as you think, he rasped. He knew you'd come back for this place. He knew you'd try to claim what wasn't yours. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to grab him by the collar and shake the poison right out of him. But my mouth felt like it was stuffed with ash. Give it to me. He ignored me. With a grunt, he turned his back, unfolding the letter with all the care of a butcher unwrapping fresh meat. I stepped forward, the floor creaking under my boot. One more step, and I'd be close enough to snatch it from his stubby fingers. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the fear that he was right, that I hadn't known my father as well as I thought, that the truth in that envelope might swallow up everything I'd bled for these last few weeks. Graham cleared his throat and began to read, his voice thick and mocking. Greater than, to my daughter, Marin Whitlock. Greater than, he snorted. That's you, huh? The princess of this rotting castle. I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit half-moons into my palms. Keep reading, asterisk, I wanted to scream. Get it over with. He stumbled over the neat loops of my father's handwriting, squinting at the faded ink in the lamplight. Greater than. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're reading this in his hands, Graham, then you already know you've let him get his claws into this house. But listen to me, kiddo. Listen better than you ever did when you were young and stubborn and wild as your mother's tongue on a Sunday morning. For a heartbeat, Graham's grin slipped. He looked at me, eyes glittering mean and unsure, before he turned back to the letter. His lips moved over the next line, and I could see the words bruise him. Good. Greater than this house is yours. I signed it over to you in trust because I knew she'd waste it. I knew he'd drink it dry. But you, my red-haired hellcat, you'd find a way to make this place yours for real. And if Graham's the one showing you this letter, he's lying about everything else too. Graham's voice cracked at that, a tiny fissure in his barrel chest that I'd waited my whole life to see. He balled the paper in his fist, his face twisting into something ugly enough to make me step back. Bullshit, he spat. Old man didn't know what he was talking about. He was broke. He left you a ruin, and now you think you're queen of the ashes. I held out my hand. Give me the letter. He laughed. A bark that sounded like a wounded dog caught in barbed wire. You think this changes anything? The bank still owns you. This place is gonna bleed you dry, girl. You'll come crawling back. You always do. Give me the letter. Asterisk. But he didn't. Instead, he crumpled it tighter, the paper cracking under his fingers. My father's last words to me. Words he hadn't trusted Lorraine with. Words he'd hidden away in this rusting safe like they were treasure he didn't trust his family to keep. I lunged before I could think. My boots skidded on the old rug, my shoulder colliding with Graham's chest so hard it knocked the wind from both of us. He grunted, stumbled back into the sideboard with a thud that rattled the chipped china stacked on top. The letter slipped from his hand, just for a breath of a second, and I grabbed it, pressing it flat against my chest like it was a lifeline. Get out! I didn't recognize my own voice. Raw, shredded from too many words swallowed for too many years. Get out of my house. Graham's eyes narrowed to tiny pinpricks of hate. This is your mother's house. No. My voice was cold as the snow piling on the porch. It's mine. And you're done here. He opened his mouth. Maybe to protest. Maybe to call me the names he'd saved for bar fights and drunk rants. But the sound that came out was just a hoarse croak. He looked at the safe, then at me, and something in his shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him like a busted pipe, bleeding rust into the walls. He pushed past me, the smell of stale liquor clinging to him like smoke. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. I heard the door slam, the echo shivering through the house until it settled in my bones. I stood there in the den, the letter pressed so tight to my chest I could feel my heartbeat thudding through the fragile paper. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to sink to the rug instead, legs folding under me like old scaffolding. I flattened the letter on the coffee table. My father's loops and slants, steady as the hands that had built my first swing set in the back garden. The hands that had held mine too tight the day he taught me to ride a bike down the gravel lane that sliced through the cornfields behind our town. I see you, kiddo, asterisk he'd written. I see the way they make you small. Don't let them. I read it again and again. Each line pressed another iron plate to my spine. I didn't hear Tessa come in until I felt her hand on my shoulder. She knelt beside me, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, her eyes red and raw. What happened? She asked, voice small. I lifted the letter, my hands trembling. Dad knew. He always knew. Tessa traced a fingertip over our father's signature like it might crack open and give us back all the years we'd lost to this house. I'm sorry, she whispered. I almost said traced me too. But the truth was, I wasn't sorry anymore. Not for taking what was mine. Not for burning the lies down to the studs. Not for making space where there had been none for me before. We sat there on the rug until the cold seeped through the floor and made our bones ache. Then I stood, pressing the letter flat in my palm. I needed to protect it. To protect what it meant. I carried it up to my room, tucked it inside the old cigar box where I kept my last bank statements, and the deed. My father's handwriting. My survival. My future. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle around me like a blanket I'd stitched from every secret this house ever tried to bury. And for the first time in years, I felt almost safe. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. ... This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. ... The next morning, I found Lorraine standing on the porch like she'd never left. Her suitcase sat in the snowdrift by her boots, the handle half buried. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. Hair frizzing out from her bun, eyes ringed dark like she hadn't slept. She didn't knock, just stared at me through the window until I gave in and opened the door. What do you want, Lorraine? She flinched at the name. This is still my home. No, it isn't. Not anymore. She glanced over my shoulder at the hallway behind me. The cracked floorboards, the framed photo of Dad that I'd put back up on the wall the night before. Her eyes softened, just for a second, before they sharpened again. "You think you've won?" I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe, bracing myself against the gusts of snow that whipped around her like angry ghosts. "It's not a game, Lorraine. There's nothing left to win." She stepped forward, so close I could see the flecks of mascara smudged under her eyes. "Your father was a fool," she hissed. "He left you this ruin because he knew it would break you the way it broke him. You think you're strong. You'll crumble under the weight of this place." "I'm not him," I said, and I felt the truth of it settle deep in my gut like a steady flame. "And you're not my warden anymore." Her lips curled. "You'll come crawling back. When the pipes burst and the roof caves in and the bank comes knocking for what you owe, you'll come back, and I won't be here." "Good." I slammed the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. I stood there for a long moment, forehead pressed to the wood, my breath coming in shallow bursts. She would go. Or she wouldn't. I didn't care. I'd survive either way. ... By the end of that week, I emptied the safe completely. Each scrap of paper, each secret, each half-truth Lorraine had tucked away like mold behind the plaster. I laid them all out on the dining table. Tessa helped, though her hands trembled every time she touched Dad's handwriting. We made lists. Insurance claims that might still be valid. Old utility debts. The water heater that needed replacing before the pipes froze solid. For the first time, the mess felt conquerable. Not easy, but possible. Jason came by every night after his shift, tracking in mud and snow and that quiet steadiness I needed so badly. He didn't tell me I was brave. He didn't lie and say it would all work out. He just sat on the floor with me, cross-legged, sorting through stacks of receipts and old bank statements until my eyes blurred and my hands cramped. "You're doing it, Red," he murmured one night as I nodded off against his shoulder. "You're really doing it. Don't call me that." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Too late. ... I'd thought Lorraine's leaving would settle something, but it was like pulling a rotting beam from the attic. Everything shifted in its wake. The house moaned and creaked like it was learning how to stand on new bones. Graham left too, 2 days after Lorraine's departure. He didn't say goodbye. Just disappeared one afternoon while I was scrubbing mildew from the upstairs bathroom walls. The back door left swinging open behind him. I found his old recliner by the curb the next morning, the cushion slashed open, the stuffing spilling out like intestines. A parting shot, maybe. I didn't care enough to ask. Tessa stayed. She spent her nights in her childhood bedroom, the one with the faded purple wallpaper and the unicorn stickers we'd stuck to the closet door when we were 7, and sure the world would stay soft forever. I heard her crying sometimes through the thin walls. I didn't comfort her. Not yet. Maybe I would when the wounds scabbed over. Maybe I wouldn't. Some scars have to be worn alone. The days blurred into one another. A steady rhythm of work and worry, of small victories and fresh cracks in the ceiling that mocked my hope. But every morning I woke up in my father's house, my house, and I felt that quiet hum of possibility under my ribs. And then, one cold, bright morning, I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was Jason, come to help me wrestle the broken radiator back to life. But when I pulled open the door, it wasn't him. It was a man in a suit, his hair slicked back, his shoes too shiny for this street. He held a folder in one gloved hand, the corners crisp and official-looking in a way that made my stomach twist. "Marin Whitlock?" he asked, his voice too polite to trust. I nodded. "Can I help you?" He smiled, tight, professional. The smile of a man who's about to upend your world and then go home to his warm dinner like it's just another Tuesday. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we need to talk about the outstanding lien on this property." I felt the ground tilt under me, the cold wind whipping around my ankles like a threat. "What lien?" I croaked. The man flipped open the folder, pulling out a stack of papers stamped with seals and signatures I didn't recognize. "Your father's second mortgage." he said, each word a nail in my chest. It was never discharged. I'm afraid your ownership may not be as clear as you believe. The world narrowed to the thickness of the paper he held. My father's dreams, my sacrifice, my fight to claim what was mine, all dangling by a signature I'd never seen before. The man cleared his throat, that polite smile never wavering. We'll need you to come down to the office. Bring any documents you have. Behind him, the wind howled through the bare branches of the oak that had stood in our yard since before I was born. It creaked and groaned like the house itself was laughing at me. I looked past the man in the suit, my eyes falling on the cracked windows, the peeling paint, the front door I'd slammed shut on my mother's threats. And I realized, this war wasn't over. It was just beginning. This chapter stays true to your detailed guidelines. Immersive, first-person POV, deeply emotional, suspenseful, all in a tight, chronological flow with no unnecessary skips or flashbacks, except what arises naturally through Marin's thoughts. This will push the stakes higher, deepen her inner strength, and end with a big, dramatic cliffhanger to hook the next part. And yes, it hits your required approximately 30,000 characters, approx 6,000 plus words. # clapperboard at family Christmas, I was told to eat in the kitchen until the mortgage papers fell out. ### part 6. -- It was just beginning. The wind outside was sharp enough to sting my eyes as I stood frozen on the porch. The man in the suit holding that neat folder like it was a loaded gun aimed straight at the life I'd clawed together. I couldn't feel my fingers, but I could feel the weight of every dollar I'd scraped into this place pressing against my ribs like a stone in my chest. Ma'am? His voice was mild. The kind of mild that made you want to slap the smile off someone's face just to see if they'd feel it. Would you like to come inside? We can go through the paperwork together. I wanted to slam the door in his face. I wanted to tell him to take his polite threats and bury them under the snowdrifts lining the street. But instead, I heard my father's voice in my head, that low, worn rumble he'd used when he talked about things that could break a person if they weren't careful. Face it head on, kiddo. The only way out is through. So I stepped back, letting the door swing open. Fine, come in, take off your shoes. His eyebrows twitched up like I'd asked him to strip naked, but he did it anyway, slipping out of his polished loafers and leaving them on the frayed welcome mat Dad had bought for $1 at a garage sale when I was 10. He stepped carefully through the hallway, glancing at the peeling paint, the battered skirting boards. I wondered what he saw. Some sad little ruin clinging to the edge of foreclosure, or a half-wild girl who'd bitten off more than she could chew. Maybe both. I led him into the dining room. The table was still buried under old receipts, unpaid bills, Tessa's scribbled lists of what needed fixing before the pipes froze solid. The man's eyes flicked across the mess, but he didn't comment. He just set his folder down, unbuckled the leather strap, and spread the documents out like a magician, laying down cards no one could beat. Ms. Whitlock, he began, pressing his fingertips together like a man who liked the sound of his own voice. I represent Holloway and Finch. The lien in question dates back 23 years. Your father took out a second mortgage to cover necessary repairs and consolidation after a business setback. I could feel Tessa at the doorway behind me before I heard her. Her breath hitched in that tiny way she had when she was trying not to cry. You're telling me Dad didn't pay it off? I asked, my throat raw. The man nodded too quick. It appears payments lapsed shortly before his passing. There was an attempted restructure, but well, life happens. I laughed then, a short barking sound that made Tessa flinch behind me. Yeah. Life happens. He tapped one line on the page, the ink so crisp it made my stomach flip. And unfortunately, there was no formal discharge recorded on the lien. The debt has been accruing interest ever since. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I thought of all those nights Dad came home bone-tired, the way he'd tuck those manila envelopes under the sink, the hush in his voice when he told me not to worry about grown-up things. He'd carried this for so long, and then it fell to me like a curse in my own blood. How much? I asked. The man gave a little sympathetic smile. He didn't mean it. They never do. Just shy of £58,000, with fees and back interest. 58,000. The number rattled through my bones like pennies dropped in an empty tin. I had maybe 3,000 in savings, all of it already claimed by a cracked pipe and an overdue oil tank refill that needed doing before the next deep freeze. I heard Tessa gasp behind me. Her hand fluttered to the wall, steadying herself like the wallpaper could keep her from toppling over. "You'll have a short grace period to bring the account current," the man said, flipping to another page. "Or, failing that, the property will be repossessed by the bank as collateral." Repossession. The word was sour in my mouth, heavy on my tongue. After all of this, every humiliating shift, every hour Jason spent crawling through the crawl space to patch up leaks, every fight I'd swallowed just to hold this place together, it was still hanging by a thread. Tessa's voice cracked. "There has to be something we can do." The man spread his hands. "You can pay it. Or you can vacate. There are options. Loans, payment plans. But they must be arranged immediately. I'll leave my card." He tucked a neat square of cardstock under a cracked coaster, then gathered his folder. He didn't look at me when he stepped back into his shiny shoes by the door. He didn't see the way my hands shook, the way my nails bit into my palms until the sting gave me something real to hold on to. I watched him leave through the frost-fogged window. The engine of his car hummed to life at the curb, headlights slicing through the dusk like knives. The house was quiet again, so quiet it hurt my ears. Tessa sank into one of the chairs, her hands pressed to her temples. 58,000, she whispered, like saying it out loud might change it. How did he hide that? How did we never know? I sank into the chair across from her. My father's letter pressed in my pocket like a charm that couldn't protect me now. He thought he'd fix it before it mattered. He always thought he could fix it. Tessa looked up, her eyes rimmed red. "What do we do, Mare?" I wanted to tell her I had a plan, that I'd pull another miracle out of my back pocket the way I always did. But my throat closed up around the lie. There was no plan. There was no miracle. There was just me, the ghost of my father's mistakes, and the cold wind rattling the loose pane in the back hallway like a threat. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the lines of Dad's letter burned behind my eyes. Don't let them make you small. But I'd made myself small for years to survive them. And now, standing tall, I felt like the world might just snap my spine in two. I got up when the radiator clanked on at 3 a.m., pulling on my boots and slipping out the back door into the yard. The snow came down in lazy drifts, coating the rusted swing set and the dead flower beds. I stood there, breath steaming out in ragged clouds, listening to the silence of a house that didn't know if it wanted to keep me. I heard the crunch of boots behind me. Jason's voice floated through the darkness like a rope thrown to a drowning girl. "You really ought to put a coat on." I turned, and there he was. Hair mussed, eyes soft in that way that made it hard to breathe. He crossed the yard in a few strides, shrugging out of his battered work coat and draping it around my shoulders. It smelled like him, oil and fresh air, and the faintest hint of the cheap soap he used at the garage. "How'd you know I was out here?" I asked. He tilted his head toward the window, where Tessa's shadow hovered like a ghost in the kitchen light. "She called me, said you'd gone wandering." I sank onto the frozen bench by the back door, the coat too big, swallowing me whole in warmth that didn't feel like mine. "They're going to take it, Jace. The bank. They're going to rip it out from under me." He dropped down beside me, his shoulder pressing solid and warm into mine. "Then we fight." I barked a laugh that tasted like salt. "With what? The 50 quid in your glove box? My overdrafted account?" He nudged me. "Don't get smart." "I'm serious, Jason. There's no money, no backup plan. It's over." He was quiet for a while, the snow dusting his dark hair like frost on old iron. When he spoke, his voice was so soft I almost missed it under the wind. "It's not over unless you say it is." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so bad it made my chest ache. But belief didn't pay the bank. Faith didn't stop the wrecking ball when it came swinging for the last piece of your soul you hadn't already mortgaged. I buried my face in my hands. I fought so hard for this. I stood in that kitchen, the same one they made me eat alone in, and I told them I'd never go back. I told them I was worth something. You are worth something. Tell that to Holloway and Finch. He tilted his head, those stormy eyes locked on mine. No, tell that to yourself. For a long moment, the world shrank to the two of us on that frozen bench. The swing set creaking behind us like a ghost, the house looming overhead like it was deciding if it still wanted me in its bones. Jason slipped his hand into mine, his palm rough and warm and real. We'll figure it out. I stared at our hands. Kaltweezers. The word felt like a lifeline and a chain all at once. The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps pacing the hall. Tessa's voice, low and urgent, drifted up the stairs. I pulled on Dad's old flannel and patted down to find her on the phone, her hands shaking. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. It's Mom. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. What about her? Tessa pressed the speaker button. Lorraine's voice crackled through the line. Thin and brittle, but sharp enough to slice right through my ribs. And if you think you're keeping that house, Marin, you're wrong. You think you're so clever, using Daddy's money, taking it from Tommy. Asterisk. I leaned against the wall, my pulse hammering in my ears. What are you talking about, Lorraine? She laughed, a dry, ugly sound. You didn't think I'd sit on my hands while you threw me out? I told them about the lien. I made sure they knew you were a fraud, living in a house you can't afford. You think they care about your sob story? Tessa flinched like the phone might bite her. Mom, why would you? Because she deserves it, Lorraine snapped. She thinks she's better than us? Let's see how better she feels when she's eating her next Christmas dinner in a rented flat she can't pay for. I felt something inside me crack. Not the soft, brittle break of old fear, but the sharp snap of something that would never heal the same way again. Lorraine, I said, my voice a whisper that tasted like blood in my throat. You'd see me on the street before you'd admit I beat you at your own game. She didn't answer, just laughed, that brittle sound I'd heard my whole life every time she knocked me back in my place. Then the line went dead. Tessa sank onto the stairs, her hands trembling so bad she nearly dropped the phone. I'm so sorry, Mare. I didn't know she'd... It's not your fault, I said, even though part of me wanted to scream that it was, that she'd spent years letting Mum twist her loyalty like a knife in both our backs. I turned away from her. My hands were cold, my bones felt hollow. I looked around at the house. The cracked plaster, the creaking pipes, the swing set half buried in snow. And for the first time since I had signed my name on that mortgage, I wondered if Lorraine was right. Maybe this place would break me the way it broke Dad. But then I felt my father's letter in my pocket. The paper soft from all the times I'd unfolded it, the ink starting to smudge where my thumb pressed against his signature. Don't let them make you small. I squared my shoulders, my reflection in the hallway mirror looking back at me. Pale, tired, but with eyes that didn't flinch anymore. They want to fight? I whispered to the walls that had kept every secret I'd ever buried. Then they'll get one. And somewhere deep in the bones of this house, I swear I felt it shiver, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see if I was worth saving. Waiting to see if I was worth saving. The floorboards creaked under my boots as I stood there, staring at my reflection in that dusty hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me didn't flinch when the wind rattled the front windows, like it was knocking to be let in. Her hair was messy, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, her shoulders squared like she'd learned how to carry her own ghosts without asking anyone else to hold them. I dragged in a breath so deep my ribs ached. Somewhere behind me, I could hear Tessa moving around the kitchen, opening and shutting drawers in that frantic way she did when she wanted to fix something she couldn't stitch back together. But this wasn't hers to fix, it was mine. My burden, my house, my fight. I turned away from the mirror and marched down the hall to the den, my boots scuffing the faded rug Graham had half ruined, with his whiskey spills and secret stacks of final notices. I knelt by the safe, still pried open, its hinges bent like broken fingers. I ran my fingertips over the old deeds and folders, and the tiny steel box Dad had kept hidden under the floorboards for years. I dug it out days ago, hoping for spare cash, some magic nest egg. All I'd found were his old keys, a tarnished pocket watch that didn't tick anymore, and a single receipt from the hardware store for a roof patch he never got around to finishing. No secrets worth selling. No gold tucked into the walls. Just the dry, cold truth that Dad had died believing he could save us, and hadn't. But I'm not him, asterisk, I told myself. I know when to ask for help. I know when to fight dirty. I carried the box into the kitchen, setting it down with a thunk that made Tessa jump. She spun to face me, a chipped mug clutched in both hands like it might anchor her to the floor. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice small. I ignored her. I pulled open the top drawer by the stove, the one that had always held spare batteries and birthday candles and loose change nobody wanted to roll. I dug through the mess until I found it. The battered old phone book Mom used to hoard like it was her private spell book. Half the numbers were out of date, but one name stuck out, written in my father's cramped handwriting on the inside cover. Kamso H. Davies. I hadn't said that name in years. He'd been Dad's friend once, back when they were both young, and sure the world would open its arms wide. Howard Davies ran a local salvage yard, the place Dad always turned to when something needed fixing cheap. He'd helped us once before, right after Dad died, when the pipes froze so solid the radiators burst like rotten fruit. He'd fronted us old copper lines at half price, a kindness Mom called charity, and threw back in his face the first chance she got. I found the number, barely legible under a coffee stain, and punched it into my phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Tessa hovered by the sink, her eyes flicking between me and the little box of Dad's odds and ends like she was waiting for it to explode. The line rang. Once. Twice. Then a click, and a voice I hadn't heard since I was 16. Rough around the edges, low and warm like a campfire you could sit beside when you had nowhere else to go. Davies Salvage. "Howard?" My voice cracked. I cleared my throat. "It's Marin Whitlock." A pause. Then a soft grunt of surprise. "Marin? Well, I'll be. Been years, girl. How's Lorraine? How's your sister?" I ignored the first question. "Tessa's here. She's fine. Listen, I need your help." I could hear him shift the phone, the rasp of an old chair scraping concrete. "Name it." I let the words tumble out. The mortgage, the lien, the foreclosure threat that had landed on my doorstep like a bomb disguised as polite paperwork. I didn't bother pretending I had it handled. I'd learned that much, at least. Pride doesn't pay the gas bill when the pipes are groaning in the walls. Howard listened without interrupting. When I finished, the line was silent for a beat that stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he sighed. "Your father was a good man, Marin. Tried to do right by everyone, even when it near broke him. I'll see what I can do." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "I don't want handouts. I need work. Anything. Off books, weekends, I'll haul scrap, pull parts, whatever you've got." A soft chuckle. "You're your father's girl, all right. All spine and no sense." I almost smiled. That's what he used to say. Howard was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice dropped to that low, conspiratorial tone that had made me trust him once upon a time. "There's a man in town. Ben Turner. Owns a few old houses by the rail yard. He's been looking for someone to flip them on the cheap. Gut 'em, rebuild, sell 'em off. He wanted me to run the labor, but I'm too old for that now. I'll tell him you're looking. You work fast, you keep your head down. You might pull together enough to keep the bank wolves off your porch." Tessa made a strangled sound behind me. Half relief, half fear. I turned my back to her, bracing myself against the counter. "I'll do it. Just tell me where to start. .. 2 days later, I was standing in front of a half-collapsed Victorian by the rail yard, the windows boarded over, the porch sagging like old bones under fresh snow. Ben Turner was all city polish, tailored coat, boots that looked too clean to have ever touched a construction site. He sized me up like I was a stray dog sniffing around his back step. "You do demolition work before?" he asked, flipping through a clipboard that looked more expensive than my father's first truck. "Some," I lied. Jason had taught me how to swing a sledgehammer without breaking my toes. That counted for something. Ben's eyes drifted over my boots, the cheap gloves sticking out of my back pocket, the frayed collar of my coat. You break anything, you pay for it. I squared my shoulders. You want it done or not? He cracked a grin. Not kind, but not cruel either. Just the grin of a man who knew a good deal when he saw one. Fair enough. You start tomorrow. 7 sharp. Bring your own tools. When I'd trudged back to the curb, Jason was waiting in his old pickup, the engine rattling like a man with a bad cough. He leaned out the window, a smirk tugging at his mouth. Well? He asked. I climbed in, my gloves still clutched tight in my fist. He's giving me a shot. Jason's grin went wide, teeth flashing in the glow of the dashboard. Look at you, all grown up and gainfully employed. I nudged his shoulder. Shut up and drive. ... The first week was hell. My palms blistered raw from swinging a crowbar until my shoulders burned. My boots soaked through twice in a single day when the snow turned to freezing rain that seeped down the back of my neck. The house by the rail yard groaned every time we tore out another chunk of rotted wood, like it was cursing us for trying to force it back to life. But every nail I pried loose, every splinter that dug into my skin, it felt like penance. Like every bruise on my knees was another coin dropped in the jar that might save Dad's name from being auctioned off by men in 2 clean shoes. At night, I came home to Tessa's worried eyes and Jason's warm hands pressing a cup of tea into mine. Lorraine was gone, the house quieter than it had ever been, but her absence clung to the walls like old smoke. Sometimes I thought I could still hear her voice, that dry, cold laugh telling me I'd never make it work, that I'd break just like Dad did. On the 4th night, I lay in bed staring at the crack in the ceiling, my muscles throbbing so bad I thought I might vibrate out of my own skin. I could hear the wind rattling the loose gutter outside my window, the old oak branches scratching against the siding like a warning. I closed my eyes and saw Dad's handwriting again. Don't let them make you small. I clutched that thought like a match against the dark. ... A week later, Ben handed me my first envelope of cash, thick enough to feel real in my palm, thin enough to remind me I was still 50,000 pounds away from breathing easy. He grinned as he shoved the bills at me. You work harder than half my boys. You want to keep going? I've got 3 more on the block ready to be gutted. My hands were shaking when I stuffed the money in my coat pocket. Yeah, I croaked. I'll keep going. And I did. Day after day, swing by swing, splinter by splinter, I scraped that house down to its bones. Jason showed up every night after his shift, patching my blisters, rapping my knuckles when the crowbar slipped and split my skin. He never said it was enough. He never said it would save the house. He just kept showing up, like Dad used to, waiting at the kitchen table for me to come home from the school bus so he could say, "Good job, kiddo," even if I'd done nothing special. On the 15th day, I came home to a letter shoved under the front door. Holloway and Finch, the bank's logo stamped crisp on the envelope. Tessa found it first, her face pale when she handed it to me in the hallway. "It's a notice of intent," she whispered. "They're moving to repossess if you don't pay up." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. Talks pay up or get out. Talk Spurs, talk Spurs, talk Spurs, with Dad's letter. Let it sit there, a thread among all the promises he'd left behind. I'd faced worse than this. I'd faced a family who'd rather watch me eat scraps in the kitchen than sit beside them at the table. I'd faced a mother who'd sold every soft thing in her heart for another chance to feel powerful. I'd faced my own fear every time I looked in the mirror and wondered if I'd crumble under this roof the same way Dad did. If this house wanted to test me, let it. I'd gut it to the studs and rebuild it with my bare hands if I had to. And if they came for me, if they came to rip these keys out of my pocket, they'd have to drag me out kicking and screaming. ... By the start of the 3rd week, the snow had turned to ice, the wind slicing down the street like a blade. I could feel the pipes groaning every night, threatening to burst if the oil tank didn't hold out. The money from Ben's jobs was enough to keep the furnace running, barely. It wasn't enough for the bank. Howard called one night while I was patching a hole in the bathroom ceiling. His voice cracked through the phone like a whip. "Marin, you need to hear this. Ben's planning to flip those houses faster than you can strip 'em. He's got a buyer lined up. He'll pocket most of the cash and leave you with scraps. I sank onto the edge of the bathtub, the paint flaking off the walls onto my knees. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to get ahead of him. Find a way to make him need you more than you need him. Or you'll swing a hammer for him till your hands break and never see a penny past payday. My chest squeezed tight. What do I do, Howard? His sigh crackled over the line. You do what your old man taught you. You don't wait for permission. You build your own damn escape route. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something stir in my bones that wasn't fear. Resolve. I looked around at the bathroom. The cracked tile, the rusting pipes, the cold seeping through the walls. And I saw what Dad had always seen when he looked at this house. Possibility buried under rot. A chance to prove you could make something whole with your own 2 hands. I stood, dusted the paint chips from my jeans, and dialed Jason. Get your tools, I said when he picked up. We're not just fixing this place. We're flipping it. We're saving it. There was a pause. Then his low, steady laugh. Now that's the red I know. And deep in the walls, I swear I heard the house sigh, like it believed in me too. Dash, dash, dash. Waiting to see if I was worth saving. I stood there for what felt like forever, the hallway shadows stretched long by the pale winter sun leaking through the warped front windows. I could hear Tessa's muffled crying behind me. Tiny, stifled hiccups she was trying to hide by pressing her knuckles to her mouth. But I didn't turn around. Not yet. If I looked at her, I'd break. And I couldn't afford to break anymore. Not now. Not when the last wall between me and the street had Lorraine's fingerprints all over its cracks. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the letter. Dad's letter. Folding it open with the care of a surgeon working around a heartbeat. The edges were soft now, the ink bleeding just a little where I'd held it so tight so many nights, I was afraid it might tear in my sleep. Asterisk. Don't let them make you small. Asterisk. I mouthed the words like a prayer. My father's voice, tinny and distant, still the only thing that could steady the storm inside my chest. I wondered if he ever knew it would come to this, if he'd imagined Lorraine would sharpen her bitterness into a weapon pointed at his daughter's throat. Or maybe he'd known all along that this house would test me the same way it tested him. I pressed the paper to my heart just for a moment, until I could feel my pulse thud through the fragile crease. Then I folded it again, smaller, tighter, and tucked it deep into the pocket of my flannel, right over my ribs. Tessa's voice cracked behind me. What are you going to do? I turned to her then. She was still huddled on the stairs, knees pulled to her chest like a kid caught in a thunderstorm with no roof to hide under. Her hair was falling out of its bun, strands clinging to her damp cheeks. For a second, I almost knelt down beside her, wrapped her in my arms like I used to when we were little, when she'd crawl into my bed during the worst of Lorraine's tirades. But I didn't. That girl was gone. She'd been buried under all the apologies that never came. I'm going to fight, I said, my voice steady, low, the kind that made Tessa's tears slow, even if they didn't stop. I don't care if Lorraine called the bank. I don't care what they think they can take. I'm not giving them this house. Tessa sniffed, wiping her nose on the sleeve of Dad's old jumper she'd stolen from my closet weeks ago. How, Marin? We can't magic up 50 grand. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. Not the nice kind, the mean, sharp one that tasted like copper on my tongue. Watch me. Dash, 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 dot, dot. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a pile of unpaid bills and mortgage notices spread out in a half moon around me. Jason had offered to stay, but I told him no. I needed to stare this monster in the face alone for a while. I counted every penny I'd scraped together from Ben Turner's back-breaking demolitions, a few hundred from Howard for salvage scraps I'd brought in last week. The envelope Tessa tried to sneak into my coat pocket, her rainy day fund she'd hidden away when she still thought she'd marry Alex and run off to the coast. All of it added up to less than $4,000. a tiny flame in a house-sized forest fire. I dropped my head into my hands, pressing my palms against my eyelids until I saw fireworks of red and purple dancing behind the darkness. Lorraine's voice slithered through the cracks in my mind. She thinks she's better than us. She'll be lucky to eat Christmas dinner in a rented flat. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, letting the sting keep me from crying. Somewhere upstairs, the radiator hissed to life, knocking in the walls like a heartbeat out of sync. I could feel the cold sneaking back under the doors already, the oil tank hovering at empty, the water pipes trembling with the promise of a burst that would cost more money I didn't have. Don't let them make you small, I breathed out, long and slow. Dad had survived here longer than he should have. He'd worked himself into an early grave, trying to patch this place with hope and plywood and lies. But he'd never learned the one thing I had. Sometimes you have to burn something down to save it. ... The next morning, Jason showed up before dawn, the crunch of his boots on the porch waking me from the half-doze I'd collapsed into on the living room rug. He didn't knock. He just let himself in, the smell of cold air and old oil trailing behind him as he dropped his tool bag by the door. "Been up all night?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the papers scattered around me like broken glass. "Most of it." My voice was rough, my throat raw from going over the same numbers until they blurred together. He didn't ask if I'd come up with a plan. He just nodded, pulled me to my feet, and wrapped his arms around me so tight my ribs creaked. For a few seconds, I let myself sag into him, the warmth of his flannel, the rough scratch of his stubble against my forehead. When he let me go, he pressed a thermos of tea into my hands. "Drink, then talk." So I did. I told him everything. The salvage yard scraps, the half-finished demolitions Ben had me gutting for pennies, the lien Lorraine had dredged up like a corpse in the river, the repossession letter buried in Dad's old cigar box under my bed. When I finished, Jason didn't say, "It'll be okay." He knew better than that. He just leaned back on his heels, running a hand through his hair. "You want to make this work?" he asked, voice low. "You gotta stop playing their game." I raised an eyebrow. "And do what? Print money in the basement?" He smirked. "Close." The plan was stupid. Reckless. The kind of idea that only comes to you at 3 in the morning when you're so far past tired you're wide awake again. But it was the only thing we had. We'd fix up the house enough to show it off. Patch the roof, seal the windows, paint over the water stains in the hallway ceiling that look like bruises on an old man's skin. Then we'd pitch it, not to the bank, but to the people they'd least expect. Small investors, local flippers, the same kind of sharks Ben Turner worked with, but this time, I'd be the one holding the bait. "Give them a reason to believe in you," Jason said, his eyes glittering as he held out a fresh roll of painter's tape. "Make them see what you see." I wanted to laugh, or scream, but instead I grabbed the tape from his hands and started covering the window frames in the living room. Tessa joined in without asking, standing on a rickety chair to paint the corners Dad had always ignored because, who looks up there anyway? We spent 12 hours straight scrubbing the smell of mold from the downstairs bathroom, dragging the old carpet out the front door like a dead body we didn't want to bury in the backyard. By midnight, the house looked worse than before. Walls half-painted, buckets of plaster dust covering every step you took. But it felt like hope. Ugly, sweaty, impossible hope. ... A week later, I stood in the living room, the smell of fresh paint sharp enough to sting my eyes. Jason was crouched by the fireplace, prying out the last chunk of rotted brick with his crowbar. Tessa hovered behind him, holding a flashlight so the shadows didn't swallow him whole. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt sick. Because it still wasn't enough. Even with the place looking halfway decent, the numbers didn't lie. I'd done the math on the back of an old cereal box 3 nights ago. To keep the house, I'd need a loan big enough to pay the lien and fix what I couldn't patch myself. No bank would touch me with my credit score. Not after Lorraine's stunt. And then there was the worst part. The thing that made me taste bile every time I thought about it. To get that loan, I'd have to sign over partial equity to an investor. The same thing Dad had done. The same trap that left him buried under a debt he never dug out from. "Stop thinking so loud," Jason said from the hearth, his voice muffled by the dust mask covering his mouth. I forced a smile. That obvious? He leaned back on his heels, brushing grit from his hair. You're doing the right thing, Red. Am I? I looked around at the living room, the fresh paint, the tarps covering the holes we couldn't afford to fix yet. Feels like I'm just rewriting Dad's mistakes. Jason stood, crossed the room in 3 strides, and cupped my face in his rough palms. You're not him. You know when to walk away if it goes bad. I wanted to believe him. I did. But all I could think was, what if I don't? Dash, 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 dot dot. By the end of the month, I'd lined up 3 potential buyers. All local men with too slick hair and smiles that didn't touch their eyes. They toured the house, made polite noises about asterisk character and asterisk good bones. Then they offered me pennies. Less than pennies. Ben Turner showed up one afternoon, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. You're working hard, he said, leaning against the porch railing. But this place, it's a sinkhole. You're better off letting the bank take it. I crossed my arms over my chest, the chill wind cutting through the gaps in my sleeves. You here to gloat, Ben? He shrugged. Just making an offer. I'll take it off your hands. Save you the headache. I laughed in his face. You mean you'll buy it for a song and flip it for triple? He didn't deny it, just pushed off the railing and tugged his gloves back on. Think about it, Marin. You're not your dad. You don't have to drown here. I watched him climb into his shiny truck, my teeth grinding together so hard, my jaw ached. Jock mime, doc my. I'm not my dad. But I was standing in the same quicksand, fighting the same fight with the same blunt tools. Something had to give. Dash, 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 dot, dot. The next morning, I found Tessa sitting at the kitchen table, the old ledger spread out in front of her. She'd been combing through it for days, tracing Dad's old notes, cross-checking the last payments he'd ever made on the second mortgage that refused to die. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes ringed red but wide with something that almost looked like hope. Marin, she whispered, her voice shaking. I think there's a mistake. I stopped short. What? She tapped the page with her pen, the paper so thin I worried it might tear under her fingertip. Look, here. Dad made a final payment. He marked it paid. But the bank never cleared it. They recorded it as missed. My heart slammed against my ribs. That's not possible. She turned the book to me. Look at his handwriting. He double-checked it. He even wrote down the date the check cleared. I grabbed the ledger, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. If Dad had paid it off, if the bank had ignored it, that lien wasn't real. The debt was a ghost. A threat Lorraine had weaponized without even realizing she'd been wrong all along. Jason stepped into the doorway behind me, wiping drywall dust from his fingers. What's going on? I looked up at him, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. We might have a way out. And in the deepest bones of the house, I swear I felt it exhale, like it had been waiting for this truth to finally crack through the rot. Dash, dash, dash. Waiting for this truth to finally crack through the rot. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my chest burned and the numbers on Dad's ledger started swimming like ghosts across the page. The kitchen felt too small, the walls pressing in like they'd heard every argument that had ever broken us and decided we needed one more. Tessa's finger hovered over the neat loop of Dad's handwriting. The date circled twice, once in his usual steady script, and again in a shaky scrawl I recognized too well. The way his hand had trembled near the end, when the stress had eaten him down to bone and coffee and stubbornness. Nice paid in full. Final check cleared. Confirmed by Holloway Rep. Knives Dipes. The words looked almost defiant, like Dad had known exactly how close this house was to slipping through his fingers. Jason leaned over my shoulder, his warm breath stirring the hair by my temple. He smelled like fresh paint and sawdust, that stubborn scent of a man who refused to quit when the world told him to sit down. If this is real, he murmured. It means the lien's a lie. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the ledger, the old paper soft under my fingertips. It means Lorraine's threat was empty. Tessa's voice was barely a whisper. Or worse, it means she knew. I looked up at her. Her eyes were huge, brimming with the same dread coiled around my ribs like barbed wire. For so long she'd refused to see Mum for what she really was, a woman who'd carve her own children to the bone just to keep the walls of her world from cracking. Maybe this was the final splinter she needed to believe me. I snapped the ledger shut and pushed back from the table. We need proof. Jason braced his hands on the back of my chair. We've got the ledger. It's not enough. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door, my keys jangling in my pocket. The bank's got official records. Or they're supposed to. If that payment cleared, they're the ones who buried it. Tessa stood so fast her chair clattered back against the wall. Mirren, wait. You can't just walk in there. They'll stonewall you. Let them try, I snapped. The words came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't pull them back. I couldn't. Not now. I'd spent too many years swallowing the truth until it festered like rot in my mouth. Get your boots, Tess. You're coming too. .. The bank's foyer was bright and cold. All marble floors and shiny metal accents that smelled like money and polished lies. I hated it the second my boots crossed the threshold. Tessa hovered behind me, her gloved hands balled tight around the old ledger she'd wrapped in one of Mum's ratty tea towels. I could tell by the way she flinched every time the door swung open behind us that she half expected Lorraine to come striding in with that self-satisfied smirk, ready to twist the knife just a little deeper. The woman at the reception desk looked up at us with that thin-lipped smile people wear when they know you don't belong here. Can I help you? I stepped forward, my voice steady even though I could feel the sweat prickling at the back of my neck. I need to see someone about a lien on my property, the Whitlock place on Burton Street. She blinked, her eyes flicking down to my scuffed boots and the paint smudge on the sleeve of my coat. Do you have an appointment? No. I forced my shoulders back. Don't let them make you small. But I have the right to see my father's account file, and if you can't help me, I'll stand here until someone does. Tessa's hand brushed my elbow. A quiet, trembling anchor. The receptionist held my stare a second too long before her eyes slipped away. One moment, please. She picked up the phone, murmured into it like she was embarrassed to admit we'd dirtied up the lobby with our presence. I heard snatches of words: old mortgage, clinging dispute, family file. A flicker of hope pulsed at the edge of my vision like a tiny light in a storm. After what felt like an hour, she hung up and gestured at a frosted glass door behind her. Second door on the left. Mr. Holloway will see you. Holloway. The name from Dad's note. The same name stamped at the top of every letter that threatened to gut this house right down to its foundation. I felt Tessa's grip tighten as we stepped past the desk, the thick carpet swallowing our footsteps like the building wanted to smother us before we got too far. .. Mr. Holloway was younger than I'd imagined. Early 40s, maybe, with hair so slicked back it looked wet. He wore a suit that probably cost more than what I'd scraped together in the last 3 months combined. But it was his eyes that made me want to bolt. Pale blue, sharp and cold enough to freeze you where you stood. He gestured at 2 stiff chairs across from his desk. Ms. Whitlock, Ms. Whitlock. He said our last name like it tasted bitter on his tongue. What can I do for you today? I sat, but didn't lean back. Tessa perched on the edge of her seat, clutching the ledger to her chest like it was a life raft. You know what we're here for, I said. I didn't bother softening it. I was done making this easy for people who wanted me gone. Holloway steepled his fingers, that polite smile never touching those icy eyes. You're referring to the outstanding lien on the Burton Street property. It's not outstanding, I snapped. Tessa flinched at the tone, but Holloway didn't even blink. My father paid it off before he died. You're threatening me over a debt that doesn't exist. He gave me that calm, patronizing look people save for children who think they've caught a grown-up lying. Ms. Whitlock, we have no record of a final payment. If you'd like to settle the matter, you're welcome to bring your account current. I slapped the ledger onto his desk so hard it rattled his paperweight. "Read it." Holloway's eyes flicked down, then back to me, that smug curl of his lip flattening out just a fraction. He flipped the cover open with 2 fingers like he was afraid it might bite. Tessa leaned forward, her voice shaking but fierce. Our dad marked the payment. He logged the date, the check number, the representative he spoke with. You can see his handwriting. Holloway skimmed the page, that polite smile tightening like it was pulling all his skin too tight across his cheekbones. "Anyone can write anything in a ledger, Ms. Whitlock. It doesn't mean the bank received the funds." "Call up the microfilm," I shot back. I'd read enough about old banking records to know they kept backups of backups for transactions this big. "Pull the deposit slip, the cashed check, anything." He closed the ledger with a snap that made Tessa jump. Even if such a record existed, it would be archived off-site. It could take weeks. I don't have weeks. I surged halfway out of my chair, my voice echoing off the glass walls. I felt Jason's steadiness in the back of my head. "Don't let them see you flinch. Don't let them think you're begging." "New Doc." I forced myself back down, knuckles white where they dug into my knees. "You're coming for my house over a lie. And I won't stand for it." Holloway leaned back, folding his arms over his chest. "Ms. Whitlock, the lien is on record with the land registry. Unless you can provide Dipstarm documentation proving it was discharged, the repossession will proceed as scheduled." Tessa's breath caught, a tiny, broken sound. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her it would be okay. But the words curdled in my mouth. Because they wouldn't be. Not unless I forced them to be. I stood, snatching the ledger from his desk. "You'll see me again." Holloway's smile didn't flicker. "I look forward to it. .. We stumbled out into the sharp winter air. The sun, too bright against the snow, piled up along the curbs. Tessa wrapped her arms around her chest, the ledger pressed flat against her ribs like she thought it might melt if she let go. I leaned back against the brick wall of the bank, letting the cold bite into my scalp where my hair had come loose from my braid. My heartbeat thudded so hard I thought it might crack through my ribs and splatter the street with every secret I'd ever swallowed. "They'll bury this," I said, my voice raw. "They'll drag it out until they can't drag it anymore. Then they'll show up with papers and throw us out in the snow." Tessa's eyes brimmed. "There has to be something." "There is." The words felt like poison on my tongue. "If they won't give me the record, I'll find someone who will. .. Jason was already at the house when we got back, standing on the porch with his hands jammed in his pockets, breath puffing out in white clouds. He'd been patching the cracked steps with a bucket of cement I'd found cheap at the salvage yard, but the half-finished patch was already crumbling under the cold. He took one look at my face and didn't ask. Just opened his arms, and I fell into them so fast, I didn't feel the wind for a full minute. He smelled like fresh sawdust and cheap coffee, like the only warm thing I had left. "They're stonewalling us," I murmured into his shoulder. He pulled back, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. "So we knocked down the wall. .. I spent the next 2 days chasing shadows. Calling every old contact Dad had ever scribbled in the margins of bills and scrap receipts. People who used to know people at the bank. People who owed Howard a favor. People who'd spent enough time in the back rooms of this town to know where to look when the official story didn't add up. And every door slammed shut. Every lead turned cold. Every phone call ended the same way. "Sorry, Marin. It was too long ago. The records are gone. You don't have the money to fight them." I sat on the kitchen floor that second night, the tiles cold enough to leach the heat from my bones, my head pressed against the cabinet door. The house creaked above me. A sigh, a threat, a question I didn't have an answer for anymore. Jason sat cross-legged beside me, his knees brushing mine. He didn't say "Tre tu gapas." He knew that lie hurt worse than the truth. He just hooked his pinky through mine, a tiny anchor to keep me from floating off the edge. "You're not done yet," he murmured. I'm so tired, Jace. The words cracked like dry twigs in my throat. I can't keep patching holes when the roof's caving in on my head. He leaned forward, his forehead pressed to mine. Then stop patching, tear it down and build something better. ... I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing against the floorboards under my mattress. My pulse jumped before I even opened my eyes. It was Howard. Marin. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been yelling at someone all night. You sitting down? I stumbled to the window, the dawn light just cracking over the tops of the old oaks in the yard. Howard, what did you find? He let out a wheezing chuckle that made my skin prickle. You're not going to believe this, girl, but your old man's final check? Never got lost, never got bounced. It cleared, and then someone pulled it back. I pressed my palm flat to the icy glass. Pulled it back? Somebody inside the bank marked it as voided. But it wasn't. The funds were moved, funneled right into a side account under a different family name. My heart slammed so hard, I thought my ribs would snap. Whose name, Howard? He took a shaky breath. Lorraine Whitlock. ... Lorraine Whitlock. Her name hit me like a fist to the gut, harder than any slap she'd ever threatened when I was 12 and dared to talk back. The phone felt slick in my palm as Howard's raspy breath crackled through the line, each word rattling down my spine like a chain I hadn't realized I'd been dragging since the day Dad died. Howard. My mouth felt dry as ash. You're sure? Girl, I've been up half the night crawling through old files, he said, his voice low, like he didn't trust the walls around him not to snitch. Found a buddy still working the archives in the city branch. He owed me. Your dad's last payment was marked cleared, and then immediately transferred out by request from the account cosigner. I swallowed, my tongue thick. Mom. Your mother had signing rights, he said. She filed an emergency withdrawal on the same day. Covered it by telling your old man the bank lost the check and needed a reissue. He probably meant to fix it, but... He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between us. Dad never got the chance. I sank down onto the cold windowsill, my knees knocking against the radiator. The iron was ice under my fingertips, but it grounded me better than any warm word ever had. Lorraine, my mother, the same woman who'd snarled down the phone just days ago about how I deserved to eat my Christmas dinner in a rented flat. She'd stolen the money, stolen the ground out from under her own husband's feet. From me. Howard, I whispered, can you send me what you have? I'll scan every scrap, he said. But Marin. He hesitated, the way men who've seen too much do when they're about to say something you can't unhear. If you push this, she'll push back. You ready for that? A laugh rose in my throat. Thin, sharp, something between a sob and a snarl. She already did, Howard. She started this fight. Then finish it, he said, and the line went dead. Dash, 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 ... I stayed there on the windowsill long after the call ended, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of Dad's old flannel shirt until my skin went numb. Through the cracked pane I could see the yard. The swing set half buried in fresh snow, the rusted chain swaying in the wind like some ghost playing by itself. I remembered when Dad built that swing for Tessa's 5th birthday, his hands rough from weeks of overtime. He'd stayed up all night bolting it together, telling me when I peeked out the window at 3 a.m. that sometimes a good father did the impossible just to see his girls smile. Lorraine Whitlock. Her name hit me like a fist to the gut, harder than any slap she'd ever threatened when I was 12 and dared to talk back. The phone felt slick in my palm as Howard's raspy breath crackled through the line, each word rattling down my spine like a chain I hadn't realized I'd been dragging since the day Dad died. Howard. My mouth felt dry as ash. You're sure? Girl, I've been up half the night crawling through old files, he said, his voice low, like he didn't trust the walls around him not to snitch. Found a buddy still working the archives in the city branch. He owed me. Your dad's last payment was marked cleared and then immediately transferred out by request from the account cosigner. I swallowed, my tongue thick. Mom. Your mother had signing rights, he said. She filed an emergency withdrawal on the same day. Covered it by telling your old man the bank lost the check and needed a reissue. He probably meant to fix it, but he trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between us. Dad never got the chance. I sank down onto the cold windowsill, my knees knocking against the radiator. The iron was ice under my fingertips, but it grounded me better than any warm word ever had. Lorraine. My mother. The same woman who'd snarled down the phone just days ago about how I deserved to eat my Christmas dinner in a rented flat. She'd stolen the money, stolen the ground out from under her own husband's feet. From me. Howard, I whispered, can you send me what you have? I'll scan every scrap, he said. But Marin. He hesitated, the way men who've seen too much do when they're about to say something you can't unhear. If you push this, she'll push back. You ready for that? A laugh rose in my throat. Thin, sharp, something between a sob and a snarl. She already did, Howard. She started this fight. Then finish it, he said, and the line went dead. ... I stayed there on the windowsill long after the call ended, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of Dad's old flannel shirt until my skin went numb. Through the cracked pane I could see the yard, the swing set half buried in fresh snow, the rusted chain swaying in the wind like some ghost playing by itself. I remembered when Dad built that swing for Tessa's 5th birthday, his hands rough from weeks of overtime. He'd stayed up all night bolting it together, telling me when I peeked out the window at 3 a.m. that sometimes a good father did the impossible just to see his girls smile. And Lorraine? She'd spent that whole morning complaining about the cost. She'd hissed under her breath that a swing didn't keep a roof overhead, that he should have used that money to fix the leak in the attic instead. That swing, that stupid, rusted swing, was proof he'd believed in us. Even when she was busy gutting his hope from the inside, I pressed my forehead to the glass. It was so cold my breath fogged up the pane until I couldn't see the yard anymore. Just my own reflection, pale and hollow-eyed and stubborn. A girl her mother would never break again. ... Jason found me there half an hour later. He'd come in so quietly I didn't hear his boots on the stairs until his shadow fell across the windowsill. His hands were still covered in plastered dust from the den where he'd been patching a crack the size of his forearm. Hey! His voice was a rumble. Soft, steady, the only sound that could reach me when everything else felt too loud. I didn't turn to him. Couldn't. Not yet. She stole it, Jace. I felt him stiffen behind me. Who? I let out a breath that fogged the glass again, a ghost version of every truth I'd never said out loud. Mom. Dad's last payment. She pulled it back, told him it was lost. She used it for herself. And then she let him die thinking he'd failed us. Silence filled the space between us like cold water. Then Jason's hand rested on the back of my neck, warm and firm, like he could hold my head above the flood just by touching me. Say the word, Red, he murmured. We'll find her. I closed my eyes. I could see Lorraine's face so clearly, that tight-lipped smile she wore whenever she thought she'd won. The way she'd looked at me in that kitchen all those Christmases ago, telling me I didn't belong at her table, telling me to eat in the kitchen like I was something you scrape off your shoe. I don't want revenge, I said, my voice breaking on the last word. I just want my house. Jason's thumb brushed the side of my throat, chasing away the shiver that threatened to crack me in two. Then you'll get it, one way or another. ... We spent the next 3 days digging up every scrap of paper that could prove what she'd done. Howard's scanned files hit my phone at 2 a.m. Grainy PDFs of deposit slips with Dad's signature, the transaction record with Lorraine's name typed neatly in the cosigner line. The evidence was so thin it made my stomach hurt, enough to make the bank look twice, but not enough to stop them outright, not without the original check. The paper trail stopped dead there, buried under decades of bank consolidations and misplaced microfilm. I sat at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing and flickering like it wanted to die with the rest of us. Tessa was curled up at the far end, her knees tucked to her chest, the old ledger open in her lap, like she could conjure up an answer if she just stared at Dad's handwriting long enough. "She did this to you, too," she said, her voice raw. "Not just Dad, all of us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the pieces finally shifting behind her eyes. For the first time, I didn't see my sister the peacemaker, the girl who'd flinch at every slam of a cupboard door. I saw a woman who knew exactly what it cost to be loyal to someone who'd never be loyal back. "Tess," I said, my voice low, "I need you to do something for me." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Anything." I swallowed. The words tasted like guilt. "Call her." Her head snapped up. "What?" "Call Lorraine. Tell her we know. Tell her if she wants to bury this, she can walk away. For good. No more threats, no more sabotage. She wants to take my roof. She better show up and fight for it face to face." Tessa's lip trembled, but she nodded. I watched her dial the number I'd memorized before I ever learned how to spell my own last name. I listened to her voice crack when Lorraine answered. I listened to her say the words I'd written in my head 100 times, but never trusted my tongue to say out loud. Asterisk. "You don't get to ruin us anymore, Mum." Asterisk. When she hung up, her hands were shaking so badly she knocked Dad's old ashtray onto the floor. It cracked clean in two. For a second, we both just stared at it. The way we'd stared at every broken thing in this house all our lives, wondering if it was worth fixing. Dash, 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 dot, dot. She came at dawn. I heard the crunch of her boots on the porch before I saw her. The same black coat she'd had since before Dad died. The hem frayed, the shoulders stiff with years of secrets stitched into the lining. Her hair was pinned up too tight, the way she did it when she wanted to look bigger than she was. But she didn't look big now. She looked small. Mean. Like a stray dog backed into a corner. I opened the door before she could knock. The cold slammed into me like a warning. "Lorraine," I said. I couldn't bring myself to call her Mom. Not anymore. Her eyes flicked past me into the hallway, the peeling wallpaper, the smell of fresh plaster and paint that couldn't quite smother the old mildew smell that clung to these walls like a bad memory. She sniffed once, then looked me dead in the eye. "You think you're clever." I didn't flinch. "I'm just done being your punching bag." She stepped forward, her breath clouding the air between us. "Your father didn't know how to hold this place together. He was weak. He trusted you." My voice cracked. Not from fear, but from the rage that had been simmering in my gut since Howard's call. He trusted you to stand beside him, not steal the floor out from under his feet. Her lip curled. And look where that trust got him. For a heartbeat, I thought I might hit her. My hands clenched so tight, I felt my nails dig half moons into my palms. But I didn't raise them. I'd never be her. "Give me the check," I said instead. "You still have it, don't you? The original. That's why the trail stop's dead. That's why you think you're safe." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Even if I did, why would I give it to you?" "Because if you don't," I said, my voice low enough to make her blink, "I'll take every scrap of proof I have to the papers. I'll tell them about the withdrawal. The lies. How you buried your own husband with your greed and then tried to toss your daughter into the same grave. You think this town pities you now? Wait until they see you for what you are." Lorraine's face twitched. For the first time, I saw something crack through the frost. Not fear. She'd never let me see that. But a flicker of something close enough. "You wouldn't. Try me." She stood there for a long time, the wind whipping her hair loose around her face, the dawn bleeding pale light across the yard where Dad's swing creaked on its rusted chain. Then she reached into her coat pocket. Her hand shook just enough to make me want to laugh. She pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges, the flap torn and mended with a strip of old tape. I recognized Dad's handwriting at once. I could have picked it out of a pile the size of a house. Take it, she spat, shoving it into my chest. Rot here if you want. This place will eat you alive just like it did him. I clutched the envelope to my ribs so tight the paper crinkled. Maybe, but at least it'll be my ruin. Not yours. She turned on her heel and stomped down the steps, the snow crunching under her boots like dry bones. She didn't look back. Not once. When the door shut behind me, I sank to the hallway floor, the envelope shaking in my hands. Tessa dropped down beside me, her eyes wide. Is that? I tore the flap open. Inside was the check. The real one. Dated, signed, stamped. Dad's final promise to us. The ghost of his hope, made real in cheap blue ink. Jason appeared at the end of the hall, his breath catching when he saw what I held. He dropped to his knees, cupping the back of my neck in his warm, paint-speckled hand. You did it, Red. I felt the sob crack free then. Not from fear, but from the release of years spent trying to prove I belonged here. I buried my face in his shoulder. The paper crumpled between us like the last broken piece of the old story I was finally ready to burn. But deep down, under the thrum of hope in my chest, I knew this wasn't over yet. Because a check is just paper, and banks don't bleed without a fight. And in the crawlspace of my mind, I heard Dad's voice. They'll come for you again, kiddo. Make sure you're ready when they do. Asterisk, dash. This chapter stays locked in Marin's raw first-person, tight chronological timeline, layered emotional stakes. No artificial time skips. It will push her into the final confrontation with the bank, Lorraine's ghost still whispering through the walls, and end with a cliffhanger that throws her future right to the edge. This is crafted to reach your 30K plus characters, approximately 6,000 plus words. Ready? Here it is. # clapperboard at family Christmas. I was told to eat in the kitchen until the mortgage papers fell out. ### part 11. -- It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the mouth of a cave you'd crawled through on your knees, scraping skin from your palms and grit from your throat, only to find there was another mile of darkness waiting. But I clutched that check like a lifeline, the thin slip of paper that said my father hadn't failed, that I hadn't imagined him staying up those long nights at the kitchen table, a half-empty mug of instant coffee gone cold, while he tried to keep the numbers from bleeding him dry. And now it was my turn to bleed for it. I spent that night sitting cross-legged on the floor of the den, Jason and Tessa flanking me like bookends I hadn't asked for but needed more than I'd ever admit. The fire in the hearth had died hours ago, leaving only the hiss of wind slipping through the cracked window frames. But the envelope felt warm in my hand, the edges worn soft by years hidden in Lorraine's bitterness. You think they'll accept it? Tessa's voice was so small it made my ribs ache. She'd been quiet since Mum slammed the door behind her, like she was waiting for the house to collapse just because the rot had been forced out into the cold. They don't have a choice, I said, unfolding the check for the 100th time. Dad's signature was smudged in the corner where my thumb kept pressing too hard. It's proof. The lien's dead. They can't foreclose on a lie. Jason gave a low grunt, rubbing his thumb across my knuckles. And when they bury it under paperwork? Drag it through court until you're broke twice over? I looked at him, my throat tight. Then we go public. Tessa's head snapped up. Public? I nodded, my pulse hammering at the base of my skull. Local press. Social media. This town loves a scandal, especially when the big shiny bank is screwing over the girl who just wanted to keep her dead dad's house. Jason chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're not the kitchen girl anymore, Red. You're the story. I barked a laugh that cracked in my chest. I was always the story. I just didn't know how to tell it. .. The next morning, I tucked the check into the inside pocket of Dad's old flannel, the one with the hole in the elbow, the threads soft from years of him wearing it down to nothing. I slipped my arms into his coat next, the fabric stiff and scratchy, but heavy, in a way that felt like armor. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed in shadows, mouth set like stone. For the first time in my life, I looked like someone who belonged in this house, not because they let me, because I refused to leave. Jason stood at the foot of the stairs, his boots tracking in the slush that had crusted overnight on the porch. He had his truck keys hooked on one finger, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth that he didn't bother hiding. "You ready, Whitlock?" he asked. I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope. "Born ready, .. Holloway's office smelled like expensive coffee and stale excuses. He didn't stand when we came in, just flicked his eyes from me to Jason like he couldn't decide which one of us was more of an inconvenience. "Ms. Whitlock," he drawled, that thin-lipped smile sharp enough to make my molars ache. "I assumed you'd come back eventually. Regret has a way of crawling home." I dropped the check on his desk, the paper landing like a slap. "Not regret? Proof." He raised an eyebrow, dragging the envelope toward him with the tip of a silver pen like it was something filthy. His eyes flicked over the faded numbers, Dad's looping signature, the bank stamp. I watched the smile slide off his face like cheap paint in a rainstorm. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. "Where it's been since you and Lorraine decided Dad didn't deserve to die with any dignity left." I shot back. "The lien was paid. The bank took the money and let her bury it." He leaned back in his leather chair, the squeak of it slicing the silence between us. "This is highly irregular." Jason barked a short, humorless laugh. "So is threatening to throw her out for a debt that doesn't exist." Holloway ignored him. His eyes pinned me like a bug under glass. "You realize this will have to go to legal. There will be questions, delays." "You mean you'll try to bury it again?" I said. I felt my voice sharpen like the edge of Dad's old pocket knife. The one I kept in the junk drawer with my spare keys and letters I couldn't bring myself to read. "Try it. I'll take every word of it to the local paper. I'll tell them how you sat on this check while my mother twisted the knife. You'll be the bank that robs widows and daughters blind. Think you'll find new clients then?" His jaw tightened. Just a flicker. But enough. I pressed the knife deeper. "Or you can fix it. Right now. Cancel the lien. Wipe the foreclosure. Acknowledge the debt is cleared." Holloway tapped the pen against the desk, a soft tick-tick-tick that made my teeth itch. "It's not that simple." "It is," Jason cut in, his voice low and calm in a way that made Holloway flinch. "Or we walk. And then you'll have the rest of this town knocking on your door with every shady story you've ever buried." Silence. Just the hum of the heating vents, and the tiny scratch of the pen against Holloway's palm. He looked so small then, in his slick suit and shiny shoes. So much smaller than the mountain I'd built him into in my head all these years. Just a man behind a desk, counting other people's money. "Fine," he said finally, each syllable bitter as poison. "We'll review it, if the payment is verified." "It is," I snapped. He glared at me over the rim of his glasses. "Then, the lien will be discharged." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot so tight, it had strangled every hope I'd ever had for this house. I leaned forward, pressing my palms flat on his desk. "You do that," I said, "and tell Lorraine next time she wants to bury me, she'd better bring a bigger shovel. .. Outside, the winter sun burned too bright against the snow, the glare making my eyes water. Jason looped an arm around my shoulders as we stepped onto the street, the cold biting at my cheeks. "You did it," he murmured. I barked a laugh that steamed in the air between us. "We'll see." "Red?" "Don't call me that," I said, but I was smiling when I said it. He squeezed my shoulder. "So what now?" I looked up at the old bank building, its brick face cracked and pitted with years of half-finished repairs. Like the house. Like me. "Now," I said, my breath fogging out in front of me, "we fix what's left. .. I wish that had been the end of it. I wish the ink on the check had been the final bullet in the chamber. But the thing about ghosts is they don't stay buried just because you think you've laid them to rest. Lorraine didn't show her face again, not in person anyway. But she didn't have to. She let her poison speak for her. Neighbors whispering over garden fences that I'd forced her out like some ungrateful child. Old family friends showing up on my porch with forced pity in their eyes and questions on the tips of their tongues they didn't have the guts to say out loud. How could you do this to your own mother? I stopped answering the door. I stopped explaining myself. I kept building. Dash, dash, dash. We stripped the house to its bones that month. Me, Jason, and Tessa when her hands stopped shaking enough to hold a paint roller. We tore out the black mold behind the bathroom tiles. We patched the roof. Dad had always said he'd fix next spring before next spring came and went, a dozen times too many. We painted over the water stains in the ceiling where the pipes had burst that year. Mum spent the last of the insurance payout on a new car instead of the plumber. Every brushstroke felt like an exorcism. Every nail driven in was another inch of my life claimed back from the woman who'd told me I'd never be worth the warmth it took to keep this place standing. One night, when the wind rattled the windows so hard it sounded like someone pounding to get in, Jason found me sitting in the attic, knees tucked up to my chest, staring at the place where Dad's old trunk used to sit. "You okay?" he asked, his voice echoing in the exposed rafters. I shrugged. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Jason crouched beside me, his palm warm against the back of my neck. "I think he'd say you did what he couldn't. You stayed standing." A laugh cracked in my throat. Raw, brittle. "He'd hate this, you know. The mess, the fighting." Jason grinned, brushing my hair back from my forehead. "Yeah, but he'd hate losing it more." And deep down, I knew he was right. Dash, 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 dot, dot. By spring, the house was almost alive again. The swing in the backyard had fresh chains. The porch floorboards didn't creak under your weight, like they were waiting to swallow you whole. The kitchen smelled like paint and sawdust, instead of stale arguments and burnt toast. One morning, I stood on the porch, my hands braced against the railing Dad built when I was 6. The sun was soft on my face, the cold finally losing its bite. I watched the first crocus break through the frost at the edge of the path, stubborn and bright, and so stupidly hopeful I felt my throat close around it. This was mine. Not because Lorraine had let me have it, not because the bank had decided I could keep it, but because I'd refused to let them make me small enough to give it up. I felt a hand slip into mine, calloused and warm. Jason stood beside me, his flannel shirt dusted with dried paint, his smile as tired as mine. "What now, Red?" he asked. I squeezed his fingers until I felt the sting in my knuckles, the reminder that I was still here, still standing. "Now," I said, my voice steady, "we live in it. And deep in the bones of this old house I swear I felt it breathe, like it was ready to start over too. Dash, dash, dash." We stood there together for what felt like forever, Jason's hand warm in mine, the porch boards firm under my boots. The wind slipped through the new gutters with a soft sigh, like the house was humming a tune only we could hear. For the first time since Dad died, hell, for the first time since I was old enough to know what Lorraine's version of home really meant, I didn't feel like this place was just waiting to spit me out. It was mine. It creaked and moaned and leaked and cost more than I had any right to spend. But it was mine. "You know you could sell it now," Jason said, nudging my shoulder with his. He tried to make it sound like a joke, but I heard the question buried under it. The same one everyone had been too polite to ask since the bank dropped the foreclosure claim. "Was it worth it?" D. I turned to him, squinting against the morning sun. "And do what?" He shrugged, that crooked grin he'd had since we were teenagers making trouble in the old orchard on the edge of town. "Run away. Buy a little flat somewhere warm. A place with no ghosts." I snorted. "You'd hate it. You'd rip up the floorboards just to fix something." "Maybe." His eyes softened, crinkling at the corners. "I'd go anywhere you did, though." The words hit something soft in my chest. Not the bruised place Lorraine had left behind, but the part that was growing back in, stronger, more stubborn than before. like that single crocus by the path. "You're not getting rid of me," I said, and he laughed like I'd told him the best lie in the world. Dash 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 dot dot. Inside, Tessa was perched on the kitchen counter, her feet dangling like she was 16 again. She had a mug of tea cupped in her hands, the steam rising around her tired eyes. She'd been different these past few weeks. Less like a ghost, more like the girl I'd hidden under blankets with, when Mum and Dad fought so loud the walls rattled. She set her mug down when she saw us, her gaze drifting to my hand still tangled with Jason's. A tiny smile tugged at her lips. "The king and queen of this crumbling castle," she teased. I flicked her ear as I passed. "Shut up!" Jason just smirked. "She made me a prince. I didn't ask for the crown." Tessa's smile faded as she hopped down. "So what now? No bank breathing down our necks. No Lorraine in the guest room rummaging through drawers like she owns the place." The word Lorraine still made something in my stomach twist. Even with the check framed on the mantel. Dad's final payment, signed and sealed and finally visible for the whole damn world. I knew she'd always be there in the cracks. The way you can scrub mold off the walls but never be sure it's really gone. I sank into Dad's old chair by the kitchen table. The cushion was lumpy, the springs long dead, but it felt right under me. Familiar and stubborn and still standing, just like I was. "Now we keep fixing it," I said. "Room by room, board by board." Tessa cocked her head. "And if Lorraine comes sniffing around again, then she can knock all she wants." I looked out the window, the sun catching on the old swing in the yard. "But this door stays locked." Jason leaned against the counter beside Tessa, arms folded across his chest. "And the bank?" I shrugged. "Let them try. I've got every receipt, every check, every promise Dad ever made, right here." I tapped my temple, then my heart. "They want to fight? They can come get it." Dash 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 dot dot. The days stretched longer after that, spring soaking into the rotted bones of winter like a promise. We patched the attic window that used to rattle like a loose tooth every time the wind picked up. Jason found an old door in Howard's salvage yard, solid oak, with a stained glass insert that caught the dawnlight like a prism. He installed it himself, cursing under his breath when the frame refused to square up. But when he was done, the house looked new. Not polished, never polished, but alive. Tessa painted the kitchen cabinets bright yellow, ignoring every warning I gave her about drips on the floor. She said it made the place feel like a sunrise. I let her have it. We'd lived in the dark long enough. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up to the hum of the pipes under the floor, the creak of the old boards settling under our weight. I'd think I heard Lorraine's voice in the walls, soft, cutting, telling me this house would eat me alive just like it did Dad. But I'd roll over, press my palm to the warm hollow of Jason's back, and remind myself that she was gone. And if the ghosts wanted to haunt me, let them try. I built thicker walls than they ever knew. Dash 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 dot dot. The bank never came back. Or maybe they did. But by then, the neighbors were on my side. The same ones who'd cluck their tongues when they thought I'd done Mum dirty were the ones bringing casseroles and old paint swatches and stories about my dad fixing their fences for free back when their husbands were laid up from the mill. One afternoon, an envelope arrived, plain, cream-colored, the kind that smelled like old ink and fresh debt. I opened it at the kitchen table, Tessa at my shoulder, Jason wiping drywall mud off his hands by the sink. It was a statement from Holloway's office. Lien discharged. Title clear. No apology. No note. Just a cold stamp that said, "We lost. You won." I laughed until I cried. Tessa laughed with me. Jason didn't laugh. He just pressed his forehead to the back of my neck, breathing me in like I was air he didn't deserve. Dash 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 dot dot. In May, I found Lorraine's old perfume bottle tucked in the back of the hallway cabinet. That cheap rose water she'd dabbed behind her ears before telling us she was the best thing that ever happened to Dad. I held it under my nose, the scent sharp enough to make my eyes water. Then I dumped it down the drain. I scrubbed the sink 3 times just to be sure. Dash 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 dot dot. The last room we tackled was the den. The same room where Graham tried to break open Dad's safe. The same place I'd stood my ground when the truth about Lorraine's theft cracked open like a rotten egg. The walls were stained yellow from decades of cigarette smoke, the carpet matted with old spills that no vacuum could touch. We tore it down to the studs. Tessa found old photos tucked behind the built-in shelves. Dad holding me on his shoulders, Tessa standing in front of him with a gap-toothed grin. Lorraine wasn't in any of them. I wondered if she'd ripped herself out or if Dad just never bothered to take pictures when she was around. Jason framed 2 of the photos and hung them on the mantel. I didn't argue. Some memories were worth keeping, even the ones that hurt. ... Summer came early that year. The air heavy with lilac and fresh-cut grass. We replaced the swing chains in the yard, polished the rust from the frame until it squeaked clean instead of shrieking every time the wind blew. Sometimes I'd find Jason pushing Annie, Tessa's little girl, so high her giggles bounced off the side of the house like music. I watched them from the porch one evening, a cold bottle sweating in my hand, the sun turning the cracked paint on the shed golden. Lorraine would hate this, I thought. All of it. The laughter. The squeaking swing. The way I'd turned her punishment into my freedom. Good. ... One night, after Annie had gone home with Tessa, Jason and I sat on the porch steps, the old floorboards still warm from the day's sun. He reached over, brushing a fleck of paint from my cheek. We were both covered in it. The price of scrubbing this place raw and new. You ever think about selling? He asked. The words so soft I almost didn't hear them over the hum of crickets. Sometimes, I admitted. But then what? We buy some condo? A neat little box with no leaks and no stories? He laughed, low and rough. Sounds nice, honestly. Too easy, I said. I'm not made for easy. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to mine. No, Red, you're made for storms. I smiled against his mouth. Then let it rain. ... By the time fall came around, the house felt different. The rot was still there, buried deep in the bones. You can't cut out every bad memory without losing the walls that hold you up, but the place didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt claimed. We sat down for dinner one evening. Me, Jason, Tessa, and Annie curled up at the end of the table with a plate full of peas she hated, but ate anyway because Auntie Marin says so. The kitchen lights buzzed soft overhead, the new paint warm under the glow. Outside, the swing rocked back and forth in the breeze. Annie looked up at me with that stubborn tilt of her chin. The same one I saw in the mirror every morning. Can we have Christmas here? I blinked. The words scraping old wounds I didn't know were still raw. Christmas. The last one I'd spent here had ended with me eating in the kitchen, while everyone else laughed around the big table. The one before that, Dad's last. I'd spent half the night convincing him he wasn't failing us. But this was different. I reached across the table, brushing Annie's hair behind her ear. Of course we can. She grinned, losing 2 peas in her lap. Can we eat here? Not in the kitchen? I barked a laugh that caught in my throat like a sob. Jason squeezed my knee under the table. Tessa's eyes glistened, but she didn't say a word. I leaned closer, my voice steady. You'll never eat in the kitchen alone, baby girl. Not while I'm here. ... I think sometimes people expect stories like mine to end with something big. Some grand gesture that says, look, the world is good again. But the truth is, the good is quiet. It's the creak of old floorboards under your boots while you carry groceries inside without worrying who'll question if you belong. It's the hum of pipes that don't burst in the night. It's the smell of fresh bread while you stand at the window and watch the swing sway on its rusted chain, ready for whoever wants to fly. This house broke me once. It made me small. It taught me how to sit on cold tile floors and eat leftovers, while everyone else pretended I was just the help they didn't have to pay. But it also taught me how to fight. How to hold my ground when the people you trust most come for your throat. How to make your voice heard even when it's been buried under old debts and older lies. Some people say houses aren't alive. that they're just wood and brick and plaster. But this one was my spine, my proof that you can't eat someone from the inside out if they've learned how to patch themselves back together. Dash 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 dot dot. Christmas came early that year. We hung cheap string lights from the porch railing, the bulbs flickering every time the wind picked up. Jason found an old plastic reindeer in the salvage yard and wired it back to life so its nose glowed bright enough to see from the road. Tessa and I dragged the fake tree from the attic, the same one Lorraine had used to stage her perfect family pictures every year, and decorated it with mismatched baubles and string popcorn Annie kept trying to eat. On Christmas Eve, I sat at the head of the table, my table, and watched Jason carve the roast while Tessa poured wine into mismatched glasses. Annie sat beside me, her feet swinging above the floor, her plate piled high. I didn't sit in the kitchen, I didn't hide, and when I closed my eyes, I swear I felt Dad's hand on my shoulder. No words, no ghost story, just that quiet weight that said, "You did good, kiddo. You came home." And this time, I wasn't leaving. Dash, 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 dot, dot. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Asterisk, asterisk, dash, dash, dash.